Assessment Committee meeting. I'm Randy Booth, and it's my privilege to chair our committee meeting this morning. We appreciate everyone making an effort to be here after we had to reschedule at the beginning of the month, and we're appreciative to Jerry for his outstanding work in organizing this complicated beast and getting everybody that are out there online connected to us, as well as here in the boardroom. Let's just double check and make sure that we have all of our committee members here in the boardroom. We have board member Sarah Reel and myself, Randy Booth, and I believe, well, I don't know, on Zoom, are we seeing anything yet?
I'm here, Emily, board member Green.
Great, thank you, Emily. So board member Green is there. I see board member Klein as well. And I see a black screen for Jenny Earl, and I'm assuming she's behind that black screen.
Yeah, I don't know. It's not showing my video today for some reason. I don't know if I've got to reboot my Zoom or something, but I'm here though. So
that's great. Thank you. So that's everybody in terms of the board. We're grateful to all of our staff members and the public who are either Zooming in or are here live early this morning to participate with us on these important agenda items. We're going to begin with a recognition of progress and achievements and improvements in our area, and we'll turn the time to Deputy Superintendent Patty Norman for this recognition.
Yes, thank you. One more thing is during the voting, make sure that the board members that are online have their cameras on, or we won't be able to see if their hand has been raised or not during this meeting. So once we start the formal meeting.
And by raising your hand, we're meaning the Zoom raise your hand, not your physical hand. Yes. We will only see that if your camera is on. Okay, great.
Thank you so much. First of all, we have some of our CTE folks that are in the room, and this first recognition is for CTE and the amazing work that they've done. So I just want you to recognize them, and I think we might have some online as well. So if we have some online as well, turn your camera on so that we can see you. And so we have Wendy Morton, Jonathan Fry, Ephraim Zamora, Jeff McDonald, Buddy Daimler, Maren Hansen, Rachel Rout, Lola Ship, Ashley Higgs, Christina Yamada, Colton Williams, Brecken Haywood, and Sage Bowman. Now, all of these folks, let me speak to what they have done. So first of all, the Utah State Board of Education is committed to the vision of upon completion, all Utah students are prepared to succeed and lead by having the knowledge and skills to learn, engage civically, and lead meaningful lives. To accomplish these goals, staff of the board are engaged in supporting the everyday work to achieve this goal in assisting the board to create equitable conditions for student success, advocating for necessary resources, developing policy, and providing effective oversight and support. This month, we highlight the work of the following area that deserves recognition. So this is about the CTE Opportunity Gap Workshop. And down more. Okay, is that better? All right. This is part of the board's strategic plan under strategy 4A, empower USBE educators, parents, and students with access to timely, useful, safeguarded data. The background on this is the Career and Technical Education, otherwise known as CTE, began formally with the Smith-Hughes Act, which was passed by Congress in 1917, over 100 years ago. Act provided federal aid to the states for the purpose of promoting pre-collegiate vocational education in agriculture, industrial trades, and home economics. Through the years, CTE has expanded and broadened to prepare today's students to be college and career ready. The promise of today's CTE is to provide opportunities for each learner to follow their passion and to access, feel welcome in, fully participate in and successfully complete a high-quality CTE program of study. During the 22-23 school year, USBE CTE staff undertook statewide training and workshops with every LEA and post-secondary institution, leveraging aggregate data to identify and address gaps in access and outcomes. Staff trained teams from the LEAs and post-secondary institutions in strengths-based thinking, gap analysis, and root cause analysis, and they will continue working with them this year on using evidence-based strategies to close achievement and opportunity gaps. USBE CTE staff spent many hours preparing, traveling, and conducting these workshops. This is a multi-year initiative, and the work will continue toward the goal of closing the gaps to ensure that opportunity is real for all students. So if we can have those that are present stand here. All of them, yes. Talia, you as well. And those that are online, if we can have you give the wave right there. And if you go back to that, it's every LEA and post-secondary institution.
Amazing.
Amazing. Thank you for your work. Next, we have a recognition for our teaching and learning staff. This recognition is something that sometimes we take for granted when we talk about the expertise of staff, or we talk about those that are coming to the Board of Education and really being able to say, you know, what are those needs for all students in the state of Utah? And when we look at what that expertise is and how they continue to learn, this graphic will represent this. Our teaching and learning department has created an infographic to highlight the various levels of expertise and professionalism of the employees working in teaching and learning. Specifically, the infographic highlights the expertise of the teaching and learning team members who support quality instruction, educator preparation, and educator licensing, such as 28 team members have or are currently serving on a board or commission. 47 team members have earned or are currently earning a certification. 88 endorsements have been earned or are currently being earned by team members. 99 awards have been received by team members. 57 hold a bachelor's degree, 42 hold a master's degree, and another 15 have earned their doctorate degree. As a collective, the team has served 343 years at USBE. I'll say that again. 343 years at USBE, with 1,048 years in the field of education. We are so grateful for this team of quality professionals and other contributions to the work here at USBE. Dr. Thronson, do you want to add anything to that?
I'm just thankful for the opportunity to work with all those lovely humans. And our data is going to be changing to 16 doctorate degrees. We're hiring our new arts coordinator, and she is coming from being the dean at the University of Montana. So the numbers keep going.
Thank you. It's always nice to be able to see in a data infographic, especially all that wealth of information. Back over to you.
This is an amazing group of people. We had opportunity earlier this week to have a report on our reading efforts, our literacy efforts, and on Capitol Hill. And Dr. Thronson and an enormous team of these individuals that we're referencing in teaching and learning just represented our efforts so well. And it was such a thrill to see the progress that we're making with students. So my congratulations to Dr. Thronson and that outstanding team that she has gathered around her. We are very, very grateful. And our children are the beneficiaries, and that's what it's all about. So thank you so much for the wonderful work that you're doing.
You have staff in the room and online if you want to give them a moment to be recognized.
And I don't have them listed, so if you want to call them out.
There's too many.
Okay, yes. So teaching and learning staff, turn on your cameras.
We have a team of almost 80. So there's Sarah Whipke, and then there's a bunch in the room if they want to stand up.
There we go.
We have too many to name.
Awesome. We're so grateful that you're here virtually and in person. We really appreciate your tremendous efforts. And if it wasn't enough, what you've already done, you're here at this hour of the morning. Crazy. We sense your commitment. Thank you. All right, now the distribution of these will happen with Andrea or someone.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, that's great. So that's it. Thank you. We're always happy to take a moment and recognize the excellent work that's taking place throughout USBE. We're now going to have an opportunity for public comment, and actually two of our action items today have to do with assessment, and we have Catherine Clark, Assistant Director of the Greenwood Charter School, who would like to speak to us about assessment for kindergarten. And Catherine, are you online?
I'm here.
Oh, in person. That's awesome. Well, come on up to the microphone, Catherine. You'll have 3 minutes to express your opinion, and we've definitely had an opportunity to read what you've submitted to us in advance, and we appreciate your getting that to us in a timely fashion. Go ahead, Catherine.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. Like you said, I'm Catherine Clark, and I serve at Greenwood Charter School. Today I'm speaking as the math specialist and assessment director. I would like to talk about the question around whether Acadience math should be adopted for the kindergarten entry and exit assessment. I have some concerns about Acadience math overall and also for kindergarten age. Acadience math is a benchmark screener assessment, and it has gone through some validity tests. According to the adequacy brief by the company in 2019, the predictive and concurrent validity of measured by correlating to other standardized tests showed that in kindergarten, it was a 0.4 validity rating. By the time you get to second grade, it was a 0.8. So while 0.4 might be a valid level, that discrepancy between those two grades is something that, to me, that is concerning. Acadience math in itself is concerning to me. In our own school, has not been a good predictor of proficiency. So our in 2022, thinking about our third grade, we had our small group of third graders. We had 16 students pass RISE test with a 3 or 4 proficiency. 7 of those students were identified by Acadience math as needing either strategic or intensive help to become on grade level. Using just the iReady diagnostic assessment, it showed all of those students were on grade level. And of course, the RISE showed that as well. I really appreciate the teaching and learning team at USBE for bringing in some excellent math people to come do professional learning for us over the last couple of years. One of them this last spring was Jo Bowler. She's talked a lot about how time tests are not appropriate for students to be taking, and the Acadience math test is a time test. These tests often increase anxiety and math avoidance. One of the other things that is concerning to me is if we taught this for kindergarten, then I am concerned about how it's going to be entrenched in our other grades. And I know it's already passed for first through third grade, but I do have concerns around that as well. In first grade and up, they're required to do computation that is vertically aligned, and that is not aligned to best practices of instruction, where students often need horizontal alignment for number sentences. In third grade, they're asked to do division using the box symbol, which is not aligned to the dot over dot line, and can be confusing for students because the numbers don't reflect the same way of showing what looking for the dividend and all of the. I just lost all the names of the the math pieces. Anyway, I really want to urge this committee to think about best practices. I know that you have a really important work to do in following the legislative mandates for assessment for all of our students. And I know that that's important, but I would urge you to make sure that we are supporting best educational practices as well as finding opportunities to find appropriate assessments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Catherine. We appreciate your being here and your words of caution, and we'll certainly take that under advisement.
One more online.
One more. All right. And we also have Monica Wilbur online, and we'd like to turn the time now over to Monica. Monica, are you there?
I am, Chair Booth. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go right ahead.
Okay, thank you. The USBE has been using core guides since at least 2020, and the idea of it bothered me a lot, so I thought I'd speak to it today. My first concern is that standards, if done properly in the first place, should be so clearly written as to not be misunderstood by the teachers entrusted to teach them. Standards shouldn't need training wheels in the form of core guides that only serve to further centralize control of classrooms at the state level. Does the USBE trust the state's teachers to be the experts they always claim them to be, or doesn't it? Why does the USBE staff feel it necessary to add an additional layer of standardization to the standards through core guides that give teachers word banks in the form of approved academic language to use? Why does the USBE staff feel it necessary to decide for teachers what type of background knowledge is critical to teach the standards? If the standards aren't clear enough on their own to be interpreted properly by the expert teachers in the classrooms, either you have problematic standards or expert teachers with problems. Core guides won't fix either of these scenarios. My second concern is that State Code 53G10206 forbids the state board from persuading a student or instructional or administrative personnel to a point of view that is inconsistent with the principles of individual freedom. The easiest way the USBE can avoid exercising undue influence toward an unlawful perspective is to prohibit USBE staff from creating core guides that provide outside references or evidence sources over which the USBE has no control. They're often produced by national organizations that have agendas that conflict with Utah laws like 53G10206 and others. Instructional material by Planned Parenthood and Love is Respect are just two examples recommended by UEN to teachers in core guides that result in adverse student treatment forbidden by statute. If the USBE never steps into that space of providing shadow curriculum in terms of instructional resources, it doesn't have to worry about overstepping the bright lines set in law. Let the LEAs determine their curriculum and let the state board focus on its general control and supervision to ensure the LEAs are following the law. Finally, these core guides are produced by USBE staff and go through a series of developmental steps, none of which include a final approval by board members themselves. You as board members ought never cede your oversight of the system to unelected functionaries of the USBE, who are not held directly accountable to any constituency for decisions that will directly impact children in the classroom. I'm asking this committee to vote to discontinue the extra layer of unnecessary micromanagement known as the core guide development process. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Monica. We appreciate your input. And that's it, Andrea, in terms of our public comment. Thanks to those, and we are always grateful to hear from you. Wow.
We're in the club.
A new
All of a sudden.
I can't figure out how to do it.
I want to teach me.
Just pull it.
So,
Yeah. Have to loud. Be mean to the door.
okay.
Right, I think we're back. And those that are online, we're just working through the challenges of new technology, which I'm sure in the end will be a great improvement, and we'll figure it out just as quickly as we can. Thanks to those that are here to help us figure it out. We appreciate that. All right, our first action item is a review of the annual core standards queuing process. And I'd like to turn the time over to Dr. Thronson to conduct this discussion.
Thank you. So this is an annual process that is in board policy that we bring to you the current feedback on the standards that we do in the annual core survey that goes out through public notice and our listservs and anywhere it can go to get out to the public. So you have a couple of different resources in your backup. The first is the survey results of what those look like. And the second are the queuing rubrics. Those are part of board policy, I think it's 302, in which we share the results of those queuing rubrics as well as the standard surveys to demonstrate to the board if certain standards need queuing, either within cycle or outside of cycle. So for example, mathematics is up for revision this year through the 7-year standards timeline that the board has approved. And so in the years past, world language, arts, library have all been up for queuing, but ultimately the data didn't indicate that they needed to be revised. That is not the case in mathematics. In mathematics, the queuing rubric is indicating it's time for a revision as well as the queuing timeline. So one of the actions from the board or the committee we would request today is to forward a recommendation to the board to queue the standards process for mathematics as it is time, not only in the timeline, but as well as the data that we have in the survey and the queuing rubric. And we have additional data that we can present to the full board in September, if you'd like, around how did the field, what are their thoughts on whether the standards need revision. So let's just take you through the survey results first. We administered this over the summer as we typically do. We're required to do a 30-day release. We did a little bit over 30 days and we had 1,892 responses. You can see the historical response rate. The first year we did this, we had 92. The last couple of years, we've been in about the 2,500 range. This year we had about 1,892. So still pretty significant. You can see the participation of who engaged in that survey. Over almost 50% were parents, with educators making up the second most participation. And then down below, you'll have the overall satisfaction. We asked them, how satisfied are you with the standards? And I will say, when we talk about standards, people really just aren't necessarily only focused on the standards, but thinking about teaching and learning related to those standards. So some of the comments that you'll see below aren't necessarily standard specific comments, but more around like the content area itself. So when you talk about arts, the appreciation for wanting more music, or when you talk about world language, people want more options for the languages their kids can engage in. So you'll see it's not always directly related to the standards, but we call it the annual core standards survey as we are asking about the standards. And so you'll see the levels of satisfaction there in the table that you have in your backup. And then finally, you have the queuing rubric results. So staff go through using the queuing rubric that the board has approved and take those factors into consideration to identify, is there a need for queuing those standards within or outside of cycle? So again, the board created a 7-year timeline. That is how we pace standards. And so we just did English language arts. You'll see it has a very small queuing rubric result, which you would expect given they're brand new and we've already been through this process so recently. Whereas mathematics has been over 7 years since our last extensive revision, truly more than that for extensive revisions, but at a 0.83. Historically, a 0.4 has cued the math standard or the standards for revision. So in this case, math is definitely above that 0.4 that has historically by this body moved a standard into revision process. So you'll see those there. Overall, there's library media is back up at the 0.47, so something for you all to consider. Last year, we did not queue it for revision, but there may be consideration that this committee wants to discuss. And then moving down, you've got the actual comments. They're usually about 200 to 300 comments that I go through and look for themes. Unfortunately, ChatGPT cannot take that much data, so it is manual labor that we go through, and I read all of them and try and code them into meaningful categories based on the frequency that those comments come up. So you'll see, for example, in English language arts, there's a desire for cursive instruction. Cursive has been in the Utah standards since 2014. So again, it's in our standards. People would just like to see it maybe happening in classrooms. So you'll see those different concerns as well as appreciations for what is in the standards for math in particular, since that one is indicating a queuing. You'll see there's concerns around the amount of standards in mathematics, concerns around parents not being able to help their children in math. A lot of that comes down to, did we send homework home too early, where kids haven't learned how to be accurate before they practice homework, which should be for automaticity. Those are things we can help with professional learning with educators. Aren't necessarily the standards, it's the way that we are probably asking students a little too early in their mastery. And then concerns around how math is being taught to meet the needs of different learners, and just making sure it's accessible to all. So you'll see those concerns and questions and feedback on the standards for each content area. And then that's kind of it for the overview of the standards survey. And then your other document is the queuing rubric. You'll see those for each one. At the top is highlighted the content area and then the scores. The way to read these is whatever box is color coded with usually a blue or something like that is where the staff member scored that particular element from the queuing rubric. So with that said, I will open it up for whatever questions you might have about this process. And ultimately, the recommendation would be to go ahead and queue mathematics standards for revision based on the queuing rubric as well as the timeline approved by the board.
Are there comments or questions from committee members? Board Member Green.
I don't have any questions. Thank you.
I think it's Pearl.
In order for us to see that you want to say something, you have to have your camera on.
I can't put my camera on for some reason. I'm not sure what the issue is.
So then you'll just need to speak up and say, I'd like to say something or something.
Okay.
However you'd like to do that.
I'd like to say something.
Go right ahead.
All right.
Thank
I
you.
would like us to move forward the mathematics standards for revision, for consideration for revision by the board.
Thank you. We have a motion that we want to recommend to the board from this committee that mathematics be put in the queue for review and reconsideration in the process that has been established. Do we have a second?
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Any discussion?
I have a comment. This is Board Member Klein.
Yes, please go right ahead.
I just wondered if staff could maybe tell us what they have in mind for changes this go around. I know we've, for the last 7 to 10 years, been using a Common Core aligned math, and there's been a lot of frustration around that, and we've seen the proficiency scores decline over that period of time. Is there something new in the works that will be replacing that, or that we are looking toward as a solution to that decline?
Dr. Thronson, do you have someone you'd like to have respond?
That would be awesome. Lindsay Henderson is here, and she's our secondary math specialist and can speak more articulately. But the big idea is we as staff don't drive the changes to the standards. That's going to come from the parent review committee and then the writing committee. But Lindsay can be able to share some of the trends in mathematics that may be part of the revision.
Please go ahead, Lindsay. Thank you.
Thank you. Lindsay Henderson, secondary math specialist. I just want to reiterate what Dr. Thronson said about the standards revision process being driven by parent feedback from the parent review committee, and then written by the committee that we select for the standards revision process. The feedback we've been getting from our leaders and from parents and from students in the field is that it's time to modernize the mathematics experience for students in Utah. We're teaching mathematics like it's like it was taught in the 1970s and 80s, and we're in 2023. And we have things like computers, and we have things that exist that help kids to especially in secondary math, to come to solutions quicker. And we need to have more integration of technology, and we need to have a richer experience for our students to reason and sense make about mathematics and mathematical experiences.
Thank you.
Follow up.
Please.
I just want to clarify that the focus going forward with math is going to be tech-based mathematics and not pre-Common Core proven methods. Is that correct?
That's not exactly correct at all. It's just that we need to teach mathematical concepts as if students have access to tools that they have nowadays. And I just want to reiterate, especially what Dr. Thronson said at the beginning, that it's not my decision or anybody's decision in particular. This is committee work, and we'll rely heavily on our parent feedback from the parent review committee and from the standards writing committee as well to make those changes. Those are just pieces of feedback I've heard from teachers and educators in the field.
Okay, so I just have a comment before we move on to a vote. I've heard from parents that are very frustrated about the move towards math being on computers, as their kids don't learn it nearly as well. And it used to be that we did not allow kids to use even a calculator in math so that they would actually learn how to do it in their own heads and be able to know how to work those problems without being reliant on some kind of technology, which at the time was calculators. And now we're moving on to computers, which are much more capable. And yet it doesn't help our children become more capable in math. It makes them more dependent on computers for math. And if we're trying to help them be self-sufficient and be able to actually think for themselves and not just be facilitators of tech, I would encourage the writing committee, whoever is ultimately accountable for this, which it sounds like there is, that, there's an obscure body that will be making the decisions, that there won't be any accountability, which concerns me as well, that they move us back towards helping children be sufficient or self-sufficient in their ability to do math calculations without using devices as a crutch. That paper and pencil method is tried and proven. That's how we got the computers in the first place to be able to do what they do, is because of incredible mathematicians that learned with paper and pencil how to do calculations. And I don't want to lose that for our future generations. So that is my comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Board Member Klein. Deputy Superintendent Norman.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Board Member Klein, thank you for that comment, because it reminded me to state that it is just the queuing, which means then it goes into that 13-step process that all of you, so it's not obscure at all. It really is like, here are the 13 steps that you as board members voted on, and then those steps, you have that feedback all along the way, even to the very end. And so it does go through those steps in that process. And then, if you can see it sideways, if you turn your head a little bit, that it's on there. So that's the process that the queuing will incur. So all of those comments will be heard by board members and brought forward.
May I
Thank
just
you.
respond to that, Chair? I won't belabor
Please
the
go right
point,
ahead.
but I just want to make a point that on previous standards, where we've been given only input towards the end, and I know we're trying to change our process, so we have earlier input, and that's why I'm speaking up now as to my concerns in order to help direct or hopefully influence the direction at the outset. I've noticed that even with the input I've received from my constituents and the large amount of input that we've received in comments submitted to the board by parents, that very little of that is actually given serious input over what the writing committee comes up with and amendments that I put forward based on my constituents' feedback that has been flatly rejected. And so I just hope that they are truly allowing for input, meaningful input from parents, and actually taking that into consideration instead of just paying lip service to parents or hiding behind parents for the purpose of passing what they want to pass instead of what the people actually want. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any further questions or comments from committee members or any clarifications from staff? All right, we then have a motion before us to,
For Chair Booth.
yes.
I'm so sorry. I just dropped my son off, so I'm just a second here late. But I also just wanted to encourage, as we get this conversation going and the curriculum developers, staff in the room that will be dealing with math, that we keep what Member Klein had just mentioned at the forefront. I have 5 children in school. I've been involved. I'm in the room, in the rooms. I'm in the schools for a long time now. And I can echo that experience that with math being utilized through computer programs, there really is a level of math conquering a computer game versus learning math technique. I would love to see paper and pencil with math equations. And I would say utilizing that, I guess K through 12. I can't even say, oh, you can use the computer more in the higher grade levels. But I just see there's a cognitive connection that happens when you're computing your math with a pencil and a paper. There's the memorization, there's a connection, there's a student being able to practice writing and penmanship, organizing their data from the top down. They can see if that is off one, they've calculated the wrong numbers together, so their number comes out wrong. So I know that we will continue and have the opportunity to have these conversations. I do look forward to engaging more efficiently in this process, so these types of concerns are not coming in at the end. But I want to make it known that at the beginning, this was also my desire that math in age-appropriate development of children, whether or not whatever technologies exist, we still have minds and that need to be developed appropriately in human anatomy, human sciences, whatever. Those connections are made from writing things down. And one more thing about it is that there's a bit of frustration that I hear as a fly on the wall, watching kids do their homework, that happens with the computer learning. There's been positives for sure. Let's keep that there. But I also want to just point out that there are frustrations that happen when the only thing that they keep getting thrown to learn math is a tutorial on Canvas or a program on the computer. And it's becoming a crutch that the teachers are being eliminated from the teaching process with their students in front of the room doing the same equation over and over and over and over again. And then students being able to ask questions, and like that level of involvement that happens beautifully in a classroom when that teacher is in front of the room and not throwing students on computer programs. So I'm advocating for teachers to teach, to show passion in math, and to be laying out those foundations that can continue to be a quality check in Utah's education. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate that comment. Any other comments? If not, we have a motion before us. How shall we restate that? I'm not sure how to.
It's in blue.
All right. So Vice Chair Earl moved that the committee moves forward the mathematics standards for revision to the full board using the process that has been established for standards revision. Is there any further discussion? If not, let's vote. All those in favor, please indicate.
Yes.
Yes.
Board member
Yes.
Earl, yes.
Member Green, yes.
Yes.
Jenny was a yes, and Board Member Klein was a yes. I'm a yes, and Sarah's a yes. So
And
that
Board Member
passes
Green is a
unanimously. Pardon me?
Member Green is a yes.
Is a yes.
Yeah,
So it's
yeah.
Unanimous.
Yeah, it's unanimous. Thank you very much. All right, our next item is an action item having to do with R277406, Early Learning Program and Benchmark Assessments, an amendment. And we will turn the time over to staff for an explanation of an overview of what we need to be considering here. We have Angie Stallings and Darren and a number of other staff members, Elise, Christine, Teresa, who would like to take it on. Angie, go for it.
I will. Thank you. Thank you. Angie Stallings, Deputy Superintendent of Policy. It's a pleasure to be here this morning with the Standards and Assessment Committee. I also have to my left here, Teresa McIntyre, who is, she will be supplementing or adding once I start with just a beginning introduction. Andrea, if you could start actually by showing the slides right there. Thank you. I can see them now. And I'm on the next slide, if that's all right. So the background portion of the slides. So just as a reminder, the State Board of Education created a reports and requirements task force that's been working for a bit over a year now. One of the reports that the Reports and Requirements Task Force studied was related to the kindergarten program. And as part of a survey that they shared with LEAs, they received a lot of feedback about the KEEP assessment, and that's the kindergarten exit and entry and exit profile. As part of that feedback, the Reports and Requirements Task Force recommended that the state board seek legislative change to allow the state board to select the kindergarten assessment. So previously, before this last session, the KEEP was the designated assessment in Utah code. Through HB 477, that a change was made to allow the State Board of Education to designate or select a kindergarten assessment. And as you can see on the slide there, we received feedback from a number of individuals on whether they would prefer the KEEP as the kindergarten assessment or the benchmark reading and math assessments to take place of KEEP. And you did hear some comments this morning about Acadience. Just wanted to be clear that that is the current vendor of the benchmark assessment, but the benchmark assessment vendor could change, so may not always be Acadience. And so if you hear me talk about the benchmark assessment or Teresa talk about the benchmark assessment, you may be thinking Acadience because that's our current vendor. And so as a result of this feedback, our staff did an analysis and have a recommendation for the Standards and Assessment Committee and board about which assessment to choose. And I just wanted to clarify that the decision you'll be making today will impact starting the 24-25 school year. So for the 23-24 school year, the kindergarten assessment, the required kindergarten assessment is the KEEP. And so I'll now turn the time over to Teresa and Andrea, if you could go to the next slide.
So we thought we would just present just a little bit of a timeline because we've had a lot of questions about what is the current kindergarten assessment. So in August right now, we're bringing this before our Standards and Assessment Committee. In September, it should be brought before the full board, the recommendation, and then the schools will administer that designated assessment in the 24-25 school year. So as of now, like Angie said, we're sticking with the KEEP for this current school year. Next slide. So this is just the board rules that are going to be impacted by this decision today. So our early learning program and benchmark assessments, kindergarten programs and assessment, and then pupil accounting for the kindergarten assessment days at the beginning and end of the school year. So we'll talk a little bit more about those. Next slide. So one of the reasons we decided to look at this, and one of the reasons our LEAs are really requesting Acadians over the KEEP is the time difference and the reporting burden of one assessment over the other. So this slide just provides that information of how long does the KEEP assessment take versus how long do those benchmark reading and math assessments take. And then this information is really the pros that we had looked at as a staff and feedback from the field as to the pros of the KEEP versus benchmark reading and math assessment. So our KEEP assessment does provide more in-depth reporting information. It includes specific standards and includes writing at the KEEP exit. The benchmark reading and math does have progress monitoring attached with it, supports longitudinal data because it really those skills progress, and the longitudinal data not only carries throughout the kindergarten year, but through future years for that child. It does include a middle of year assessment. Our KEEP is just at the beginning and end of the year, and those two measures are separate from each other. They're not longitudinal. It includes a reading on grade level score and measures the most predictable skills for future success. And then it doesn't need any additional calendar days like we currently allow for the KEEP assessment in kindergarten. The cons. So for the KEEP, that there's no progress monitoring or middle of year option. It does not include a growth component. And there are at least 6 days needed for the assessment, which means 6 days less that the students are receiving instruction in kindergarten compared to other grades. The cons for that benchmark reading and math, it does not assess as many standards and it does not assess writing. So those are two cons that we have with that benchmark reading and math assessment. So this just goes overall the impact on board rule or legislation. For the KEEP, if the board determines to stay with the KEEP assessment, we would just want to look at adjusting the calendar days. And if you move to the benchmark reading and math assessment, there are a lot more impacts upon board rule or upon legislation itself. So there would need to be adjusting the days, moving the kindergarten testing info. We would move that from the current kindergarten board rule into our benchmark. We would need to look at adjusting our preschool assessment and then adjusting the math and reading benchmarks. So those are all within legislation. So as a staff, our recommendation is to use the Acadians currently, but our benchmark reading and math assessment moving forward for our kindergarten assessment. So this is really based on the request from our Reducing Requirements and Reporting Task Force and the stakeholder feedback that we have received. So that would be moving to that benchmark for the 24-25 school year. And since so many schools already give the benchmark assessments in kindergarten, it will not be a difficult transition. So we actually have about 91% of our kindergarten students currently take the Acadians reading assessment, even though it's not required. They're just opting in, and 64% of our students, or 69%, sorry, take Acadience Math. So most of our kindergarten students are already taking those assessments in addition to the KEEP assessment, because LEAs really find that longitudinal data valuable for them, and they appreciate the screening value. We also do recommend that we continue to support the KEEP assessment. It is an assessment that is housed on Data Gateway, and run by our IT team and managed on the end by me. And so we just recommend that we continue to allow LEAs to administer that assessment. We do have a number of LEAs that really find a lot of value in the KEEP assessment. They just don't want it to be required to be reported, and really that looking at that aggregate data. So a lot of them still want to give it. Some of them will happily not give the KEEP assessment anymore. So our recommendation is just to continue to support that for those who want it in the field. And then as far as calendar days, we really recommend, if we designate the benchmark reading and math assessment, that we eliminate any calendar days used exclusively for assessments in kindergarten. Because most elementary schools are already giving that benchmark assessment, and all schools are giving them in grades 1 through 3, and we're not providing any extra calendar days for them. So we feel like we should just remove that. And then if we do go with the KEEP assessment, then it would just be changing the number of calendar days and from 12 to 6.
And if I might add, before we turn the time back over to you, Chair, you'll notice that this overview is really about the decision of the Standards and Assessment Committee and Board to designate which kindergarten assessment they would like the LEAs to use beginning 24-25 school year. There are 3 board rules, 406, 489, and 419, that all 3 are on the agenda today, and all 3 are impacted by that decision. So the drafts of each of those rules currently align with or anticipate the board accepting or approving the benchmark reading and math assessment as the official kindergarten assessments beginning next fall. If the Standards and Assessment Committee or board decide to keep the KEEP, we will draft the board rules accordingly. And so we'll be going through each board rule individually. Before I start sharing the edits to R277406, does the committee have any questions for either of us about the feedback and the recommendation from staff to move to the benchmark math and reading assessment beginning with the 24-25 school year?
Board Member Rio.
One quick question. So what I'm gathering is that KEEP isn't super great. It's not a great tool. It's not doing what we need it to do as much as the Acadians or another benchmark, right? But my question really is, when would we decide, or what is the process to deciding if Acadians is what we stay with or we move to another assessment tool?
Okay, so 2 questions or 2 answers. I think the KEEP is actually a good tool, and it does provide a lot of valuable data to teachers. However, it is a lot longer to administer. It does require those calendar days. And so as we have reached out to the field, the majority are saying we would prefer to just stick with that Acadians reading and math, which is what our current benchmark assessment is. They also appreciate the fact that they have that longitudinal data across grades like K through 6 for reading and then K through 3 for math. And they like the additions that reading and math benchmark provide for them. The second question is, we currently have an RFP out for our benchmark for reading. And once that RFP closes, then we'll be reviewing that information as a committee and then presenting to the board our recommendations based on that. So that is currently in the works.
So it could be separated, like the math and the reading could be different assessment tools, right?
Potentially.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there would be a separate RFP for math.
Yeah.
Okay. Is there like a
Separate
queuing?
RFP.
Is there a queuing process for the math part?
I'm not sure when the math work comes up. So
Okay. That's great. Thank you.
Or could speak to that, or Darren.
Yeah, we'd love to hear from them.
Oh, June of 2026 is when the math
A whisper.
is up.
Okay.
I'm not over the math. I'm over the ELA for assessment.
Board Member Klein.
Yes. So the RFP, you said it's out right now. And have we had any responses to that? Are we doing this prematurely? Should we be waiting until that comes back?
Although staff, they never received responses. Right? Yes, so thank you. Yes, the RFP is in process right now and the provider will be selected, I believe, this fall. If you look at, and in just a moment, we're going to go to the actual rule draft. And Andrea, if you want to get ready to pull up R277406, you'll see that on lines 34 through 52, we're actually making the changes to the board rule in anticipation of the board selecting a new provider. And so it clarifies on lines 37 through 40, for example, that for the 23-24 school year, the benchmark reading assessment is the Acadience reading assessment, and that beginning the 24-25 school year, it's whatever the state board approves as the provider for the benchmark reading assessment. And so we can make those changes now, and then once the provider or vendor is selected by the board later this year, that will then be the designation of the benchmark reading assessment provider, if that makes sense. And so instead of naming the name of the company in board rule, we are going to point to the RFP process and the selection of the provider by the board as that indicator of which assessment provider is named.
Is there a provider that we have in mind that we are aiming this RFP towards?
No, we very much set it up that we're looking for a good reading benchmark assessment, and based on the criteria that we've selected, we don't know who that vendor is going to be.
Okay.
We're just going to go through the process.
Okay. I have a couple more questions. Is that okay?
Of course.
Can you explain why it takes less time? Like, we don't need to set aside days for the Acadience benchmark, whereas we do for KEEP. It sounds like significantly less amount of time. Is this an embedded assessment? And so it just they don't realize they're being assessed. Why is it that it takes so much less time? And my second question is, there was mention of preschool assessments in the slides and a reference to code, which I hadn't looked up yet. Is this something that will be also used for preschool, and is that required by code, or is that just something that we're doing because we want the data and a baseline on these kids?
So the KEEP assessment is administered one-on-one. It does take about 15 minutes. When we had, most of our kindergarten programs as half-day programs, that was 50 students that a teacher had to assess at the beginning and end of the year. And so we designated calendar days for that assessment in order to just give them that time that they needed. For the Acadience, it takes about 5 to 7 minutes, and it's at the beginning, middle, and end of year. And a lot of our districts actually use assessment teams and not teachers to do that assessing. And in addition, it is so much less time that the burden is not there. And in addition, it is required in grades 1 through 3 for Acadience, that reading and math benchmarks, and we're not providing any calendar days for that. So we felt like as a staff that we shouldn't be providing that for the kindergarten teachers as well if we're moving to those reading and math benchmarks. As far as your second question, the preschool assessment is in the legislation that it's supposed to be aligned to the kindergarten assessment. And so if we change, currently we have our PEEP, which is our preschool entry and exit, which does align to our kindergarten entry and exit assessments. So if we change what our kindergarten assessment is, we'll have to look at changing the legislation regarding our preschool assessment and its specific alignment. There is a reading benchmark that's available for reading in preschool, but there currently is not one for math.
So,
And Chair, if I may just supplement, it is the section of code that does require the preschool assessment is 53E-4-314. So that is the section of code that would need to be updated if the board chooses to designate the benchmark reading and math assessments in lieu of the KEEP.
okay, so this is affecting, what we do today is affecting preschool assessment too, not just kindergarten. Is that what you just said?
We can leave the preschool assessment the way that it is and continue with the PEEP assessment. It would just need to change that line in code that says it has to be aligned to the kindergarten assessment. But the preschool assessment could stay the same, and we're not making any recommendations to change that at this point.
Okay, and then I didn't hear an answer to one of my questions. Is the benchmark assessment for Acadians all done online? You said there were support teams, so the teacher doesn't have to do it, but is it being done through the computers? And if not, and if it's just through the support, with the help of the support teams, did we have to hire a whole bunch more people in order to take on that burden? And are those support teams employed by the state, or are they in the school already, the individual schools specific to those schools?
So the assessment is administered or scored online, but it is administered one-on-one with a student. And the student actually reads words or responds to questions for reading. For math, it is mostly just scored paper and pencil. And again, our measures in kindergarten are done one-on-one. For most of our LEAs, they've hired assessment teams that go out to their schools and administer those assessments so that teachers aren't the ones. Our smaller LEAs and our charter schools, a lot of them have teachers that do administer that, or paraprofessionals that administer it. So we do not provide a testing team at the state level. We do provide training for testing teams or anyone who's administering the assessment, but we don't actually support that. And like I said earlier, 91% of our kindergarten students currently take the reading benchmark assessments, and 64% of our kindergarten students currently take the math, even though it's not required. Our LEAs find enough value in that data that they're administering it, even though it's not actually in board rule.
So these are opt-in assessments. They are not required.
Currently, yes. They're required in grades 1 through 3, and they're not currently required in kindergarten. The state does pay for licenses for both reading and math if a LEA chooses to opt in.
Okay, I do have a motion when we're ready, just for an amendment. I think Jenny has her hand up though, so.
Okay, Jenny, Vice Chair Earl.
Go ahead, because I have a motion, but if Board Member Klein wants to make hers, and then I can add to her.
And I did send it in to our, so I don't know if somebody has that, they can put it up. Number 6 is on R277406 is currently stricken out, and I would just add this language in its place. And so I would move to replace number 6 that is stricken with the following verbiage. I don't know if you can see where number 6 is stricken out. Can they scroll to that?
Oh, it's
Okay, do you want
Okay.
to actually
Is
make
this-
that motion officially?
Is that it?
Hang on, I'm not seeing the stricken out part. We're on. Let's see.
I can't
have it right?
I can't read it. Sorry.
Am I looking at the wrong thing? Is there another number 6? I didn't put the line number. But is there a number 6?
Compel them then. So strike that, then they can require them to do it. May I ask a question, Chair?
Of course.
Apologize. I'm just now seeing the language for the first time. Board Member Klein, if you strike that language, what that would mean is that an LEA could then compel a student to take it. Currently, the language says an LEA may not compel a student to take the benchmark assessment.
So I'm just trying to see where number 6 is that is stricken in the draft. Because that's not the 6 that I'm looking for. Is there another 6 further down in a different section?
There is. I can read to you what it states. Right now, subsection 6 states, notwithstanding section 3 of this rule for the 21-22 and 22-23 school years, in response to circumstances resulting from the COVID-19 pandemic, the superintendent may waive testing and reporting deadlines and determine alternate testing and reporting deadlines. The reason we struck those lines from this rule is because we felt that they're no longer needed since they applied to the previous 2 school years.
Right, and I'm fine with that language being stricken. I'm just asking that my language replace what is being stricken there for number 6. And so my motion would be to add for number 6, the language, an LEA may not require or compel a student to take a district benchmark assessment in reading and mathematics if the student's parent has opted the student out of a similar or comparative benchmark assessment approved for statewide use. This speaks to the comments that were made in our previous board meeting by Christina, Board Member Bogus, that we had talked about making a legislative ask for, but I felt like we could just add it. It would be appropriate to add language in this rule.
So I have a point of order maybe. In our rule R277404-7, which is our student and parent participation in student assessment in public schools, parent exclusion from testing. And anyways, I guess this is a duplication of what we already have, and we passed. I'm just trying to understand if there's lack of clarity, maybe Board Member Klein could articulate that, because in our exclusion form that we just updated for this school year, we have Acadience reading, Acadience math listed on there. So maybe I'm just seeking some clarification that they already can opt out, and it already is in rules. So is there a need for the duplication? I'm just trying to understand what
there are district benchmark tests that are being given to students who opt out of the state, those benchmark assessments that are approved for statewide use. So if a student opts out of those that are on the exclusion form that they are able to opt out of, districts are then telling students that they're required to take a district benchmark in lieu of, which if the parent opted them out of those on the statewide assessment form, they should not be, there's a reason that they opted them out, and they shouldn't be required to take a different one in lieu of. So this is simply to say that districts cannot require the student to take one of their own benchmark tests that is essentially the same as the state, but just not designated as a statewide assessment.
Chair, may we?
Yes, please.
Thank you. And thank you. That additional background was very helpful. Board Member Klein. One small change to this wording, if the committee chooses to go forward with the motion, would be to change district to LEA, because I would imagine we would want charter school students to also be covered. What this motion would do, as Board Member Klein stated, is it would prohibit LEAs from providing their own assessment to assess their students' reading and math fluency or where they're at. So currently, As was stated, the exclusion or the right to opt out currently is explained in code, and it's limited to those things that are administered at the state level or required or facilitated through a statewide tool or assessment. This conversation was very similar to something that Board Member Bogus brought up last month. One thing to keep in mind, this language would apply to the benchmark reading and math assessments only, or the kindergarten assessments only. And you may want to consider if the board would like to move forward with this policy prohibiting LEAs from being able to assess their own or use their own assessments, that it might be better placed in R277404, which is the board rule on assessments, and it deals with all types of assessments, not just the K3 assessment. So we wanted to share that with you. Some people who would be looking at like an assessment director, they generally are more familiar with and look to R277404 versus looking to this rule for the direction related to districts and charters' ability to assess. And I don't know if Assistant Superintendent Nielsen has anything to add, but that's the only thing we wanted to add to this conversation.
Board Member Klein.
Yes, I would be fine with changing that to LEA, which it looks like they did, and also directing staff to bring forward R277404 to be amended with the same language so that it's in both.
Darren, did you have any comments you wanted to add?
No, not at this time.
All right, thank you. Board Member Earl, was your question answered? Did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, I have a follow-up, just maybe whether we have the authority to tell districts, you can't use your own measurement tools, whatever those may be. And some of those are more formative type of assessments or more formative elements. I don't know that we have the authority. Also, I have a question. Can you hear me okay, or am I cutting in and out?
I can hear you fine.
Okay, I just got a text that maybe I was cutting in and out a little bit. I don't know that we have the authority to say, look, you can't measure any kind of benchmark or anything with your students. I think what we have is within law, which requires that we allow parents to opt out with any state mandated assessments or benchmarks at that. So then the other question leads into if a educator has some type of a benchmark assessment that they've written, whether that's maybe something they're using with their particular curriculum program, which a number of curriculums have their own basic assessments or measurement at the end of chapters, at the end of sections. Is that also requiring that they don't measure kids at all? So that it opens up a lot of questions that I don't think are here. And that's why we have very specific things listed on our parent opt-out. So
may I respond? This
Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. This motion is only specific to those students who have opted, or parents that have opted their students out of the state assessment. So it doesn't mean that the student can't take the district assessment, but they can't be required or compelled to if the parent already opted them out of the state assessment that is basically assessing the same thing. So they could still take that and the district could still give it to other students. But if a parent has opted them out of the state benchmark assessment, the district can't then require them to take a district one that is basically the same thing. That's all it is. So that's the only restriction, is just saying we are honoring the parent's request and we're not trying to circumvent and find a way around the fact that they opted out of a state assessment by making them take a district one that is essentially assessing them on the same thing and to collect the same data that the state assessment would have generated on them.
Is that clear? Does that answer any questions anyone had on staff or other board members?
I'm wondering if Darren Nelson, I'm just wondering, what is the frequency of that particular scenario happening? You're out in the schools, you're aware of what's going on. Can you speak to that? Because if that is the case, that we have parents opting out and then districts are just supplementing something else and doing the same thing. Do you know what the frequency of that is? Can you speak to that at all?
I can address the question. I'll need to talk at a little higher level, though, than your question is asking. We see parental exclusion rates and non-participation rates at the statewide assessment levels. Back in 2000, and I'll give you a little historical perspective here. I think it was 2016. The state of Utah reached its what I would call the high water mark on parental exclusion and statewide assessments, and that would be at the time was SAGE, and that was at 5.9%. That number has steadily declined over time, and then during the pandemic, the spring of 2020, and then as we suspended assessments, including most students weren't participating in in-person learning, so there weren't benchmark assessments administered at the end of year in 2020, but the 2021 school year was still very disrupted, including state assessments. Accountability was suspended again at the federal and state level. And our participation on the RISE and the Utah Aspire Plus were in the 80 and low 90% participation rates. It's interesting to note the KEEP and the Acadians reading benchmark at the time. We didn't have a mathematics benchmark administered statewide at the time, but those two particular assessments in the 2020-2021 school year, our participation rate was near the pre-pandemic, which was almost 99% of participation. So what we've interpreted that as your staff is that those two assessments, both the KEEP and Acadians reading benchmark, are considered high value by the education community, both from parents who are willing to have their students participate, even though we had lots of students who were going through quarantine periods and all kinds of disruptions, certainly at a different level than what we see with the RISE and Utah Aspire Plus and even the ACT test.
Please.
Chairman, if I may add, I wanted to add one other section of code that we may need to request an amendment to if this amendment or this motion passes. Section 53E4307 is in Utah Code and is regarding the benchmark assessment in reading. In subsection 4, the language expects or states that if a benchmark assessment or supplemental reading assessment indicates a student lacks competency in reading skill, that the LEA shall do a number of things, including provide interventions, provide notice to families, that their student is not reading at benchmark. And so right now, there's this conflicting section of code which seems to indicate that even if a student opts out of the benchmark assessment, the official statewide assessment, that LEAs still have a duty and responsibility to determine if a student is able to read on benchmark, and if not, to let families know or let parents know that their students are behind. And so that is one place where we were just looking where LEAs would expect that if a student opts out of the statewide, required assessment, that there's still another section of code that expects LEAs to diagnose or have some sort of assessment that measures, as it states here, key literacy skills, including phonemic awareness, sound symbol recognition, alphabet knowledge, etc.
So may I comment?
Please.
So sorry, I have some construction going on. The districts are aligning their benchmark assessments with the state assessments. And they shouldn't be able to just administer a proxy for the state assessment. If the parent has opted out for whatever reason the parent has for opting them out. And so if we need to amend that piece of code to allow for parents to be the primary educator in their students' education and to make those decisions, then we need to honor it fully all the way through and not and not create loopholes that can circumvent the parents' desires.
Please, Darren.
Yeah, I would just want to clarify the state assessments are aligned to the requirements in the state code. So this goes back to the previous questions about the RFP and the change of vendors. The vendor isn't as critical to the state board or the field as the requirements in the code of what skills are being assessed annually. So what we hope to see is if a LEA is trying to align to something, they're aligning to the state code requirements for measuring early literacy skills, the way that the state board is doing that with the statewide assessment platform.
Okay, so are we ready to what? Jenny, I can see you're ready to do something.
I think Emily has her hand up, maybe. Emily, is that accurate?
We don't
yes,
see that.
yes, I do.
Please, Emily, go ahead. Can't hear you.
I guess this is to Member Klein. Oh,
Okay,
hello, hello.
we just heard member Klein. We just heard the word member Klein. So whatever you said before that, go ahead and repeat it.
Okay. I'm hoping you can hear me.
We can hear you now. Thank you.
Perfect. I understand what you're saying, Member Klein, about these assessments, and I can see how that could happen. I do have a concern that it would tie the hands of LEAs, which trickles down to teachers being able to assess students for the benefit of students. Meaning if they are seeing that there's a struggle here just in reading, and then they can just jump on that and say, okay, here's the measures that we have to help the student get back up to the level that they need to. I feel like this could become burdensome to kind of the whole picture if a student begins to struggle because there wasn't a way to track that. I see a lot of controversy happening because it's like, well, why didn't I know this about my student? Well, we couldn't because they'd been opted out of a test, and so now we don't have any benchmarks to know, so they maybe can't track where that struggle first started to manifest in that student's educational journey. So I don't know if anybody could speak to, and Member Klein, you can respond too. I just want to make sure that we do keep a fair playing field for a student to be tracked because they are going to school, so that if they are beginning to fall behind, then we have measures in place that can help keep them where they need to be. So my biggest
You're cutting out.
That this could really create
We're losing you.
some problems. So I'm not.
You're in and out with your audio.
May I respond while we wait?
Please go ahead.
Yeah.
How to follow this from this all the way down to, I think I have a really bad connection because
Yep, you're right. You do have a really bad.
So
I think we heard about 5 words.
Yeah, I think I get the gist of what she's saying. I think I would take us back to what did we do before all of these computer assessments and statewide assessments. We haven't always had them, and children learned how to read just fine. It requires a teacher.
I don't know if anybody heard it. just said.
I think I heard enough. But I think, before we had state assessments or benchmark assessments, kids were learning to read. And in fact, our reading scores were much higher because the teacher had to be in tune with each of the children and where they were, just instead of relying again on technology as a crutch that then allows the teacher to not monitor the student's progress one-to-one like they used to do. And I feel like that one-on-one attention was far more effective if we just look at basic proficiency scores over time. So if there's for the few parents that do opt their children out, there are other ways for a teacher, a good teacher, if it's a good teacher, to be able to tell whether the student is succeeding or not. And oftentimes the parents that opt their children out are the ones that have high functioning students anyway. The parent kind of following out in their parents' footsteps of being informed of what the schools are doing and what they want for their child. That means they're engaged parents. Which means they're most likely very engaged with their own student as well, and making sure that their student is progressing. And so I think it would be a rare event that it would cause a problem by allowing the parent to truly opt their student out of state assessments or district assessments that are collecting data on their student that they feel is intrusive to their students' privacy, or whatever their reason might be for not wanting the state to track their students' progress. So I think that we need to honor, again, that parent's decision to not have their student tracked in that way, and expect that if we do have great teachers, like we say we do, the teacher will know whether a student is struggling or not without needing a computer tracking system to tell them that. It's just that we've become so dependent on those that it's like we don't know how to do it the traditional way anymore. And I think that's a sad commentary on our system.
Thank you, Natalie. Jenny.
Yeah, and I'm ready to vote, but I want to just add to this. I think parents currently, especially the last legislative session, can opt out of whatever they feel like they don't want. As you're talking though, I went and looked at a number of districts in the spring, and this was in the middle school age group, and looked at the programs they were using. And these were technology programs, but they were helping kids at very specific levels. The teacher would use that information. They would, anyways, the outcomes from this program on the reading levels for kids that had struggled was phenomenal. So I would be really concerned that this would impact those type of programs too, that where we're not really sure, what is or isn't a benchmark now, what is or isn't usable. So I'm ready to vote.
All right, thank you. Let's, we have before us a motion from Member Klein that the committee amend R277406 draft 1 to add the language below starting on line 130 and direct staff to bring proposed comparable amendments to R277404 to a future committee meeting. And the language is, an LEA may not require or compel a student to take a district benchmark assessment in reading and mathematics if the student's parent has opted the student out of a similar or comparative benchmark assessment approved for statewide use. All right, now, a second or something?
No, do you
need a
want
second?
to just call names? That might be the easiest, Chair Booth.
Okay, I don't need a second. Okay, so Board Member Klein, I'm assuming a yes.
Yes.
Board Member Earl.
No.
Board Member Green,
No.
Board Member Reel,
No.
and Board Member Booth is a no. So that motion fails 4-1. All right. And now we're back. We need a new motion.
And I have one ready.
Or do we already go back to Jenny's motion? Is that where we were?
I haven't made that motion yet. Board Member Clark had her motion on the table. I would recommend that the committee approves R277406, if I'm reading that right, draft 1 on on first reading and forward to the board for approval and on second and final reading. And
okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
You want to speak to that?
Yeah, I think the feedback I've received from my districts as well is that some of them have been using the Keep, but they do like the quickness and the ease of currently it's Acadians, but whatever we choose for that. And so I think this is a good direction to go. Not only is it more time actually teaching kids, but it's a quick analysis, especially at an age when kids are changing so much that it's not a long drawn out assessment. So I would speak for this.
Any other comments?
I would just say that
Please go ahead.
yeah, I am not in favor of early testing of kindergartners or preschoolers. I think that's a time where they are learning and it's not a time for testing. It's just a time for learning and enjoying the process of figuring out words and how to read and make sense of things. And the testing can wait, in my opinion, until they're older. So I am not in favor of this rule as it stands.
Thank you. Any other comments? Seeing none, we have the motion before us that the committee approves R277406 draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. Board Member Earl.
Yes.
Let's vote. Board Member Klein.
No.
Board Member Green.
No.
Board Member Reel.
Yes.
Board Member Booth, yes. So the recommendation passes 3-2.
So I just wanted to help me. I want to click clarification point of information.
Please.
A no vote, actually, I just want to make sure I understand, isn't getting rid of the assessments, it's just switching one for the other. It would keep the code the way it is. Is that accurate, or is that an accurate statement?
Please.
So a no vote today, two things. Number one, it would keep the Keep assessment.
Right.
Because that is designated in R277489. The other thing that a no vote does today is it in board rule limits the provider to Acadians unless and until we make amendments. So if the RFP at some point does designate a provider other than Acadians, we would have to bring this rule back to swap out. Because just as a reminder, the rule did state that beginning with the 24-25 school year, the benchmark reading and math assessments would be the providers selected through the RFP versus Acadians.
Okay, that's all. I just wanted clarification on that. Thank you.
All right. Are we finished? I think. Let's move on to our next action item. And this is R277489, Kindergarten Programs and Assessment. Who would like, Angie, are you taking this one as well?
Yes,
Please, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Booth. And I'll also be doing that for the next rule as well. So based on the decision that was just made related to 406, where you have now, assuming the board follows the committee's recommendation, that rule designates the benchmark reading and math assessments as the kindergarten assessment beginning 24-25 school year. Because of that, what the staff did with respect to R277489 is on line 23. Andrea, if you can scroll down to line 23, it clarifies that for purposes of the section of code that now designates or allows the board to make this designation, that for the 23-24 school year, the assessment will be KEEP. And then if you go all the way to the bottom of the rule, you'll see that the rule will then be sunset or repealed beginning as of June 30th, 2024. So this rule would sunset. We would bring it back to you for just probably on consent calendar or quick action to repeal the rule. But even legally, this rule would then sunset on June 30th. And then the R277406 that you just took action on would be the rule that would be in place, which would designate the benchmark reading and math assessments as the kindergarten assessment for beginning the 24-25 school year. That's it.
Great. I would entertain a motion,
All right, I have a motion
please.
that the committee approves R277489 draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading.
Would you like to speak to that?
No, if we change it above, this just falls in line with that. So
Any other comments or questions? Seeing none. Member Earl, let's vote.
yes.
Member Klein,
Yes.
Member Green,
Yes.
Member Rio,
Yes.
Member Booth, yes, that passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Moving on to action item 1.6, R277419-4 pupil accounting amendment. And we'll turn that once again over to our friend Angie Stallings.
Thank you, Chair Booth. As was mentioned in the overview that Teresa provided about the staff recommendations related to the board's designation of the benchmark reading and math assessment, because the benchmark reading and math assessments do take significantly less time to administer, and because the KEEP would now become optional beginning the 24-25 school year, staff recommends that we delete lines 41 through 51 of section R277419 section 4. And you can see there that what the deletion would do is it would eliminate the allowability for LEAs to designate no more than 12 educational service days at the beginning and end of the school year. And just as a reminder, what Teresa stated during her PowerPoint, this is due to the fact that LEAs are already administering the benchmark reading and math assessments to students in grades 1 through 3, and we do not designate days just for assessment for the other grades. And so making this change in 419 would bring the policy in alignment for kindergarten that we already have for grades 1 through 3. One other note I just wanted to bring to your attention, the Law and Licensing Committee separately in their August committee did take action on the full rule of R277419. That will be coming to the board during the same meeting as this change. And I just wanted to let you know that they can both pass. And if whatever action the board takes on each of the rule sections individually, we will merge both of those once they both pass and file that with the Office of Administrative Rule. The action that the Law and Licensing Committee took did not impact or address section 4 at all. And so that is why section 4 of the rule is what is before you today. And it is simply to delete this one subsection D that provides the 12 days.
All right, thank you. Any questions or comments?
I'd like to make a motion.
Please.
I move that the committee approves R277419-4, draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on the second and final reading. And I do want to speak just a little bit to this. I think that this is a good change to go to a simpler measurement tool that gets that allows our educators to be in the classroom, more time with kids, spent on quality education. So putting this in alignment is necessary. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Seeing none, we have a motion before us that the committee approves R277-419-4 draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. Let's vote.
I have a question.
Earl. Pardon me?
I think
Sorry,
Natalie had a question.
I just had a question.
Oh, we have a question. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm
please.
just looking at line 48 that says qualified
Okay.
school employees shall conduct the assessment consistent with, and then the section of code. By taking that out, are we not requiring the employees that assess or this team to be qualified to do so?
Could you please respond?
Yes, thank you, Chair Booth. No, this, what the language essentially in lines 44 through 51 stated is that an LEA could only convert up to those 12 days if the assessment measures that are described in 44 through 51 did occur. And I think that the idea was that if you're going to eliminate student instruction time or service time to assess, that these be the elements of what is required. But I don't believe that it would change anything with respect to the qualifications of those who are administering the assessment. The assessment provisions or the requirements of Utah Code and R277404 and 406 would still apply. And this language or repealing this language does not change anything legally with respect to LEA's responsibilities to make sure that ensure that those who are administering the tests are qualified.
Okay, follow up.
Yes, please.
You mentioned it doesn't change like service and instruction or service time. Can you clarify the difference between those two terms?
Yes, Chair Booth, may I?
Please.
And I don't have the defined term in front of me at this very moment, but in 2020, the State Board of Education, previously 419, stated that an LEA shall provide 990 hours of instructional time over 180 days. In 2020, the board changed that to educational services, so that an LEA shall provide educational services to students over 180 days. So educational services can be much broader than instruction only. And I used, this was an Angie fault, I guess, is that I use those terms interchangeably. But really educational services or providing services and supports to students is broader than instruction. However, I think the most common form of providing educational services is to provide academic instruction to students.
Okay, is there a minimum number of hours we are still requiring for actual instruction, teacher instruction? Because I hear that in changing the terms that we are now moving more towards computer instruction and less teacher instruction because we have brought in the new term and it's masking what's really happening in the classroom. Could you speak to that?
Yes, Chair Booth, thank you. So So part of the discussion that I mentioned a moment ago that was occurring in law and licensing was to determine whether or not we continue to require, or not continue, I apologize, for the 21, 22, 23, and actually it might even, let me see, 21, 22, 22, 23, and 23, 24 school years, for 3 years now, the state board removed the requirement related to hours of educational service time. What the Law and Licensing Committee did earlier this month in their meeting was to recommend that the board continue that on an ongoing basis and to remove the sunset provision from 419. What that means practically is that we have not had an hour requirement for 3 years, and that if the board supports the Law and Licensing Committee's recommendation, we will not have an hour requirement, but simply a day requirement to provide educational services. To your second question, or about whether or not LEAs are providing less instruction time, or the manner in which they're providing instruction, whether that's digital or in person, I cannot speak to that because as you know, we have approximately 155, 160 LEAs. Each of those LEAs are going to personalize the type of instruction to their students and personalize related to their programs, and the amount of person-to-person instruction or the amount that an LEA uses digital tools is going to vary, not only by LEA and school, but even by student. There may be some students who could engage in digital instruction for a larger portion of their instructional time, and others that would have very little. For example, you might have a student with a disability who has an IEP who may, that would change. And I see Assistant Superintendent Nielsen is ready to supplement as well.
Please.
You did a great job, Deputy Stallings. The instructional time is really that level of decision is made at the classroom level most frequently. Interestingly enough, my last year in Buckshire School District, I spent the year, myself and a few of my colleagues, auditing instructional time because we were interested to know what's happening in the classroom. Our board at the time was considering changing their schedule to extend the amount of hours available to learn certain content area. And so you can see a variety of experiences that students have under the umbrella of instructional time. And those decisions are made at the classroom, overseen by the principal and the district level.
Thank you.
To clarify, there is no required number of hours for instructional time from an actual physical teacher in front of the class to students.
Chair, not in board
actual
rule.
Instruction from a teacher.
That is correct, that in board rule, we have not designated or defined what that looks like in the classroom.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments? All right. So I think we have the motion still that the committee approves R277419-4 draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. Board Member Earl, let's vote.
Yes.
Board Member Klein.
Yes.
Board Member Green.
Yes.
Board Member Reel.
Yes.
Board Member Booth, yes, that's unanimous. Thank you. Our next item is a discussion of the high school graduation requirements landscape. Dr. Thronson and Kathy Gray.
I'm able to share my screen. I have a presentation for this one.
Point of maybe possible order or information. Can we set a time limit on this item, just so that we have time to get to the last item, and maybe at 10:30?
That sounds good to me.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Perfect. You could just slide mine off or double click on yours. Double click on mine. Double click makes it go lots of screens. Okay. All right. Jennifer Thronson, Director of Teaching and Learning. And this is basically a presentation for this committee for consideration around graduation redesign potential, or just kind of where we are and where the board wants to see this move forward. So it's a kind of reflection on present and potential future. And really the staff are seeking the board's direction, or at least some discussion around what they would like their direction to potentially be related to graduation. Given what we have seen coming from the legislature, there is interest in redefining graduation requirements consistently. We saw a couple of those this past session and wanted to kind of see where is the board in their desire to have authority over graduation. So with that said, we'll just use some current reality versus future reality and seeking guidance from this committee of what that might look moving forward. This is a discussion item, so not necessarily anything that will be directed for action, but giving us some feedback on what you'd like to see for further discussion in a committee meeting or in full board. So specifically, we had two legislative changes that happened this past session. The first one is HB 475, which added the opportunity for students to earn credit for a verbal communications course or school-sponsored activity that emphasize verbal communication. We've addressed this in board rule already with this board, and so at this point, that allowability is already in rule and is afforded for given the legislative changes this past session. Additionally, in session, SB 257 required the board to conduct a study to see if all LEAs were able to issue high school diplomas for the following kind of pathways. The first one, an associate's degree with 60 credit hours from an accredited post-secondary institution. So if they went and earned an associate degree at one of our local institutions, that would equate to a high school graduation diploma, or an industry certification with at least 500 hours of instruction from a business trade association or other industry group. So we have been working on that. When I say we, it's been Kathy Gray. That is why she is on the agenda to join us today. She's been doing the work of saying, okay, if we went and got an associate's degree, what current graduation requirements would be matched, which ones would be missing, what would the students not be receiving, things like that. And we'll dig into some of the kind of broad questions she's been investigating because of these legislative requirements. Part of the reason for this presentation today is your awareness. If there were so many bills passed this past session, over 100, that this one might have been one that you're like, oh, I forgot this happened. And so just wanted to bring it to your awareness as we are likely going to be called to interim to present on the findings of this study for potential legislation this coming year. So with that said, the question I have for you as a committee today is, who do you want driving graduation requirements? The legislature or the board? Currently, given this past session, we're seeing a lot of legislative interest in the graduation requirements. And if that is how this body would like to continue, I think we can remain silent and engaged in just allowing to see what the legislature brings us, or we can take a shift and bring the legislature some guidance of how we would like to see graduation moving forward. So that is the question that I would love some discussion around at some point today. Specifically, there are a number of rules and codes related to graduation. The first one basically just says in 204, the board has the authority, we are having some clicking things, over graduation requirements other than what's in code. So in code, it's a pretty limited list. There's requirements for language arts, math, and science in this particular code section. 3 units of language arts where the board has chosen 4, 2 units in math, the board has chosen 3, and 2 units in science. The board has also chosen 3 in that space. So there are some basic regulations that have governed our current graduation standards, and that is specifically 204 in code. Then you also have board rule 700, which has the additional graduation requirements the board has determined, as well as 705, which is around secondary completion. Additionally, you have codes such as the civics test that came out of the legislature, general financial literacy requirement as part of graduation, and then the early graduation code for competency, that students can graduate early and
local education agencies can earn the WPU for those students, even if they didn't attend all 4 years. So those are kind of the basic governing pieces at this point. As you can see, we've got 4 codes and 2 rules related to graduation explicitly. In terms of the graduation study that Kathy's been working on, the questions related to what would happen if we had an associate's degree. One of the things this committee needs to think about is, do we have the capacity for every LEA to have equitable access to associate degrees for their students? If I live in Daggett, if I live in Tintic, do I have the same access and opportunity as students who live along the Wasatch Front to be able to earn an associate's degree? We also have to consider, what are they losing out on if they skip the high school graduation diploma requirements and only have to meet associate degree requirements? Many of associate's degree have prerequisites. You can't just jump into a course without having taken prerequisite courses. And so there are some barriers to just going straight to an associate degree pathway, as well as the value of the foundational knowledge that kids are getting in high school graduation courses to prepare them for college, such as an associate degree. Then the industry certifications, some of the things we found there, you'll see comparing an industry certificate to high school graduation would be basically 16 credits, or a quarter of the length of an associate's degree. It's a much less rigorous option, and very few, if any, industry certificates only have 500 required hours of instruction. And that is where Talia or Jonathan will be able to help in terms of industry requirements. But just from our basic investigations, 500 hours is way too small and is not a very robust experience for students. And then just, we've been looking at what are other states doing. ECS just released a report yesterday on what are the 50 states doing in graduation. That is very timely for us. They've also been doing some individual study for us around what are other states doing around pathways that are beyond the typical high school graduation pathway. So those are pieces that we've been working on. Just for your knowledge, we will have a more formal report in the future, but if there are questions that you would like us to consider in that study related to associate degree pathways and industry certifications, which is what the study is required to look at, please let us know. We are open to that. And we will be back to you if timing works out prior to the presentation in Education Interim, where we expect they will ask us to report these findings before interim ends in November. To be able to share with the board, hopefully prior to those interim meetings. We don't know when this one will be called, but Kathy is working diligently to get us enough information to make informed decisions and to report to the legislature. And then we have been working on some focus groups that we engaged with last fall. In October and November, we had over 400 participants come. We talked about, do graduation requirements need to be reconsidered? And we reviewed models from other states, such as a SEAL model from Ohio, and lots of others. I think we looked at 7 or 8 different ways that people are addressing graduation at this point, and investigated what Utah values for graduation requirements. And one of those values was, we do value the ideals found in the Portrait of a Graduate, and a more closely aligned vision with that is desired by the vast majority of those that participated. Participants included legislators, community members, teachers, parents, students, a wide variety of constituents. Chamber of Commerce, we put the invite out to lots of board members attended as well. And so with that, just again, laying present versus current reality and future reality, employability skills, the Department of Workforce Services puts out, they basically curate all the job postings in the state and look for what are the common requirements for employment across those job postings. And these are the top 5 most important skills, or at least the most commonly found skills in those job requirements: critical thinking, active listening, speaking, or the ability to read and comprehend text. Monitoring was just basically being able to set goals, monitor yourself towards achieving those goals, whether those are personal goals or work goals that you're trying to work. So monitoring is about having goals and kind of monitoring your progress to those goals. So those are the top 5 skills, and really think about, do our graduation requirements achieve those employability skills so that our kids will be most successful in the workforce. So given all those layers, just wanted to give you a current status of graduation performance. So we don't have 2023 data, doesn't come in until, it's not due and it's not closed until October 1, doesn't come until October 15th. So we won't see our graduation data update for 2023 for a little bit yet, but wanted to give you currently from 2014 to 2022, we've gone up about 6%, but you'll also see we've seen dramatic increases in our low-income English learner, students with disabilities, and racial groups. We've seen a 6% overall, but then all of those groups have seen almost double digits in their rates of graduation. So we are seeing more students being successful in achieving a high school diploma, but still have some opportunities to close those differences. One of the things to consider that we drafted, it's similar to the queuing rubric we use for the standards, and this is just a draft. It's not meant to be, this would be the one you would use, but one that you could give us feedback on to be able to say, is it time to look at graduation requirements or not? So this would be a queuing rubric for graduation, similar to what we do for standards, saying, here are some key questions we would consider to help say, does this score enough points for us to be able to make those moves? You can obviously make this move without a queuing rubric, but thought it might be helpful to put some guiding questions in place to consider whether it's time or whether we would like to remain kind of neutral in advancing our graduation requirements and kind of be at the behest of the legislature as they continue to advance their message on our graduation requirements. So that is where we are, and just kind of want to see what you all see as what's next for graduation so that we can use that to help inform next steps as staff, as well as when we engage with the legislature around graduation requirements. So that is the end of my presentation, and I will turn the floor back to committee chair.
I'm going to just take chair's prerogative and insert a strong statement at the beginning of the discussion, and that is my reason for being here, my reason for being involved in a school board for the last almost 24 years is I believe we need to be in the driver's seat without any question. And though I have a great appreciation for our legislators and certainly for their interest in supporting education and the constituents that they represent being heard and their needs being met, I would love for us to continue and even to take a more active role in the graduation requirement arena. And definitely, I would hope that we continue to be in the driver's seat and that we will do whatever we need to do to be on the cutting edge of what's best for our Utah students.
I have a comment.
Please.
Well, a thought. This is really interesting to me because of what I do all day at my job, which is at Salt Lake Community College, and our emphasis on the P20 pipeline. One of the pieces that I find really interesting is that students aren't engaging in higher education, especially in the certificates and the CTE area as often because they're not aware of those programs. And I do think there's a lot of opportunity there to have students fulfill their graduation requirements through a CTE track into a community college or a tech school, right? Especially with all the articulation agreements that have been happening over the last year are aligning Salt Lake Tech and which is Salt Lake Community College with a lot of our other technical colleges. And there are ways I think we've done some test runs. We did a diesel technology, I think it was, where students while in high school would graduate with that certificate in diesel technology starting at like $60,000 a year. And then moving up to $100,000 a year through that program with that certificate. And I think that part of what is missing in our higher ed engagement is that piece where we can provide more opportunities for students in high school to fulfill their graduation requirements and get on this tech route and be able to jump right into a career or get more advanced training from there. So that's really interesting to me.
Thank you very much. Board Member Klein.
May I ask a question?
Please go right ahead.
Okay. Back to the slides. There was a couple slides that show the bar graph of the graduation rates. I'm just curious about one of those bars, the one that says racial group, and then there's the one that says everyone. does racial group, is that everybody but white students? Is that what that means? Is white not a racial group? Or is white added in with racial group on the everyone bar? Can you just help me understand that?
Yeah, racial group means not a white or Asian.
Oh, so white or Asian is not considered a racial group. Can you help me understand how that was decided?
It's not my decision, so maybe somebody else could.
Anybody?
Federal. I thought it was. Yeah, I think the designations on racial groups are federally designated. That's how we do like our applications for college and things like that. That's all based on those guidelines, but I'm not sure on this case. Yeah.
Yeah, we can get Aaron Bruff, who can give us that designation to be able to say how these things are reported out federally. We can give you that requirement.
Is he available right now?
Nope, it doesn't appear that he is.
Okay, well, I'll ask another question maybe while we find him. I noticed that there's a large focus again on the graduation rates, but I would like to see as part of this discussion the inclusion of proficiency rates as opposed to graduation rates, so that we make sure that we are not graduating students that are not proficient and saying that we're succeeding because we're graduating kids that aren't proficient, if that makes sense. And so I think our proficiency rates should be at least as high as our graduation rates in order that our numbers are not masking a problem and making us look more successful than we actually are, as well as looking at the proficiency, how we are measuring proficiency. I mean, I was just sent a document by a parent at the who has a student at the American Fork Middle School or junior high, and with their proficiency rates or their grading scale that has been watered down to the point where you can literally get 1%, like 0 to 25% is an F. And then anything above that, I mean, basically you just have to show up and be a warm body in the classroom, and you're going to pass. And so if our grading skills being equated to proficiency, because if so, then our proficiency scores are also not accurate of actual proficiency, if that makes sense. So I think we need to look at all of those aspects so that we make sure that we are graduating students that are actually academically prepared to move on, and not just graduating them early through tech programs or CTE programs if they're not actually proficient academically.
Thank you. Other comments or other discussion?
Yeah, I would if I could, please.
Yes, please. Board Member Green.
Yeah, this is one area that I do get excited about. Just developing it. I feel like we can continue to be on a really good path and bring that passion alive for our students. And the two things that I heard just from Member Klein and Member Reel is, one, I agree with what Natalie's saying is, Member Klein is saying about making sure that our academic structures in the state of Utah encourage proficiencies, and that we really hone in on the ability to get people reading and doing math, which ties in with the critical thinking that we saw as one of the top 5 skills, being able to articulate what's in their head, which is the writing ability, which is also a part of the top 5. So I feel like on a national level, we're coming to this conversation where we're readdressing reading, And we've seen our state really starting to jump into that and make that at the top of one of our conversations. And I'm excited about that. And what I appreciate about what Member Real said is that the CTE programs and getting certificates, I do see that here locally, kids that get really excited about trade schools and trade jobs, because there really is a growing first deficit in our populations that know how to do this, because that's just where we find ourselves. But we are finding that those are in high demand, and you can make a really good living doing trade schools. So if we could continue to develop that area and then get licenses and then partner with further education when they graduate from high school, so that they can go from that 50,000 to 100,000, because they can, finalize those hours or those degrees that land them into that field right out of high school. I feel like it would be quite the benefit for this generation. So those are just like 3 of my areas that I would love to see continue to be fortified. Being proficient in the academics that we are presenting to our kids, offering, certificates and developing our CTEs, and then having that align with other employment trade opportunities for students when they graduate from high school. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Board Member Earl.
Yeah, just a couple of things. I do think we need to be involved in this space, and I think the legislature recognized that, because originally this particular law that was passed was specific to you're going to, they put those in requirements in without asking. Does that make sense? They asked us to simply give those graduate degrees, or not graduate degrees, but those diplomas to those who had received their graduate degree already, or their associate's degree. I think for me, it's a no-brainer that when a student gets an associate's degree, that then we keep asking, did they accomplish enough in high school? That seems like a very odd question to me, because they've just received so many credits in higher ed, and then the question becomes, do they need the high school degree to keep moving forward? And I think the answer to that would be no. So we would want to ask, is that that those 60 hours, is that enough to say, yeah, well, you would graduate too, if necessary? I don't know where that would be necessary, that you have to validate once you've got your associate's degree, but if that's something that's necessary out there, maybe that's a question to be asking. I do think it's a fair question to ask about where students of different areas of the state have accessibility to receiving an associate's degree, but I don't think we deter the ability, or we say that just because someone or one district doesn't have access doesn't mean that others that have received these certificates already can't use that as part of their high school graduation. 2 other things. I think that graduation has got to equal academic proficiency. I think that's already been brought up several times, but if graduation does not equal academic proficiency, then we've got to be asking, where are we falling short? That's a question we need to be looking at, and making sure we're not just graduating kids and moving them through, but we're actually helping kids where they need help. One other item, I know the audit committee is currently looking at graduation rates and the data that we're receiving and making sure that's accurate. So I would caution us to make sure we're getting that information. It won't be out for a little bit before we just want to make sure that information we're gathering about graduation is accurate, I guess is what I'm saying, and to kind of see where that leads us. One other item, I do think that on our what was the other part to this? It was the 500 hours, right, for CTE or for tech or other areas. I think we need to be talking with our partners on this and decide what is what is acceptable there. 500 hours isn't enough, and what does it take to get in to those programs? I do think that once students have gone into these programs, to then make them go back and do additional hours of some kind of a thing, it could be problematic. I think we need not look at we need to look beyond the barriers to what things will help students be successful. So those are just kind of my overall thoughts. And I do think they're asking us to be involved. This was sent back as a study. Oh, one other item. I listened to a discussion. There were several superintendents this summer that were, well, it was during rural schools, and they had been asked about making service a requirement for graduation. I don't know if that's where some of this is leaning, but those particular individuals that were talking about that was not a priority for them. Their priority was to make sure kids were academically sound in what they were doing, and not to add one more graduation requirement that was more of a another thing to make sure happens. So I would really caution, if that's where some of this is leaning, that we're careful about that. There was not an appetite for that within that group that was discussing that. And I think there's some complications with that. Service is good, but forced service is a whole different thing. So I think we just need to be really cautious when we open it up to other areas. Sorry, and I do have one more thing going down my list. My last thing is that while critical thinking, perseverance, those kind of things are work skills, those should be accomplished through the academic setting. And that's how we've written our standards. It should incorporate those in. We should have those critical thinking skills there. We don't measure those independent. When you do that, you start, it kind of weakens those soft skills when we move them away from the actual projects or the actual things, the academic areas that they should be attached to. So I would really cautious about that. Okay, those are my items. Thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate the feedback we've received. Is that helpful, Dr. Thronson?
I have one more question.
Yes, please.
Just looking at the slide of the work skills that the Department of Workforce Services recommends or says is most needed. The last one on there, I don't know if Dr. Thronson went into it. It says monitoring. I don't understand that as a skill for students. Can you explain what that is referring to?
Yes, the definition they provide on the website is monitoring or assessing performance of yourself, other individuals, or organizations to make improvements or take corrective action.
So it's monitoring of self, not monitoring of students or monitoring
their employability skills. So it's about yourself, monitoring those that you work with potentially, like as a leader, or your actual organization. So it's all, but it's not related to being a student. This is employability.
I would agree with Jenny's remarks as far as, and she didn't say it this way, but I think we need to move away from the touchy-feely things and stay focused on the hard objective academics if we want to see improvement in our education system.
Thank you very much. All right, we're a little bit ahead of our schedule, and we're meeting the request of Vice Chair Earl in getting on to our final item for today's meeting. We're now moving to action item 1.8, Core Guides Process Update. We'll once again turn our time over to Dr. Thronson and her colleagues, including Holly Bell.
Thank you. So for this one in your board backup, with the changes in legislation with HB 427, individual freedoms, and then R277328, we were reflecting, like, we haven't updated the core guide material since 2020. And so just wanted to make it more current. With the feedback we received in advance from board member Earl, I do have a recommendation of how we can attend to that, but I'll just take you through what we're actually here for. And then if there's other discussion that the board would desire, we can certainly do that. So within, I'm just going to open my core guide if I can find it. All right, too many files for today. All right, so the first part did not change. This part had been previously approved by the board. It is just the second part that we were doing an update to the core review checklist, specifically with the changes that have happened since 2020 in code and rule. So as I was reflecting upon the recommendations, there was a significant amendment that Board Member Earl was proposing for the Section 5. It really is redundant to Section 2, which is alignment with current state and federal law and policy. So I'm actually going to propose an advanced amendment to say, if you would like, we could just cut review criteria 5, as it's not really necessary given it's covered in 2, because the whole point of adding the educational materials alignment to Utah policy would be covered in review criteria 2, which is alignment with current state and federal law and policy. So it's really not necessary to have this section given that. But if you all want to amend the language, whatever you'd like, but basically we're just bringing this to update it because the law has changed since 2020. So with that said, I'm here for questions, and I will take notes on things that you all want amended.
Can you scroll down to number 5 so we can see what that is in comparison to what you just mentioned?
Is basically a language from both 427 and 328 copy and pasted in here.
Oh, so criteria 5 is what we need to scroll down to, not step 5.
Yeah, sorry about that.
And someone scroll, thanks.
Oh, you're doing, sorry, I thought I was showing my screen.
In backup too.
That's the old one. You need to go to the 2023 version. I can share my screen if you want. Let me flow. Okay, this is part of 5, and then there's 2 parts of 5. It might be easier to look at it in your backup, but I'll put up what I can. Oops.
So you're recommending removing this language that was part of the bill?
I think so, and the reason is it's redundant. Coming in here, I was like, oh, that section needs to be updated, but ultimately that requirement is already in review criteria 2 and would simplify this criteria checklist in a way that I think staff know what the rules and laws are, and they would be attending to review criteria 2 anyway. So this seems like, well, yeah, we did that in 2. It seems redundant unless we really want to put a focus on it.
Right, because, for example, 427 is part of code. So why would we need to also add the additional language for each individual bill that may come up and be added to this piece?
It allows us not to have to keep coming back to you every time a law changes. So if we just say, you need to follow law and policy and leave it there, it allows for 328 to change or 427 to change moving forward without us having to come to you every time things like that happen.
That makes sense. Any
Jenny
questions or discussion from board members?
Jenny's hands up.
Jenny?
Yeah, so just a couple, and just in general, these are, and I sent these to Jennifer earlier, so I just told her I'd be asking a couple of questions. Let me pull up my my list here. So these are my questions. What is the time commitment to put together around the core guides? In other words, how much time does it take to actually put together core guides? I'm wondering the amount of time and expense that goes into the production of these.
May I respond?
Yeah, we could.
So I'll use elementary social studies as an example because we're doing that one right now. We hired 2 to 3 educators per grade level for PK6 to develop, or K6 to develop the core guide content aligned to the components laid out in the document. So they copy and paste the strand and the standard, and then they put in the concepts and skills to master, the critical background knowledge, the related standards, what happened before your grade, where do these standards go after your grade, the key vocabulary, or the term we use is academic language, and then assessment exemplars as approved in the board core guide policy. And so those contractors were for up to 30 hours of work for each of those 2 to 3 people. Then once we have all that content, we work to ensure that there's consistency and coherence across those documents. And that's done by 2 people people across all of the grade levels for about 40 hours. So for a grade level, you're looking at well, for the whole document, you're looking at that 100 hours of time split between 3 to 4 people per grade level. And staff just organizes the group. We don't actually write the core guides. We organize the educators who do that work, and then we do all the formatting and then publication and release to the field.
Okay. And then
Oh, you're on mute, Board Member Earl.
Board Member Earl, you're on mute.
sorry,
You're
it says
muted.
I apologize. I did hit mute. It says staff and stakeholders. What does that even mean? So when you're asking for stakeholder info, let's take social studies or LEA again, who does that incorporate?
So in that section on the first page where it says stakeholders, that's who we send the feedback out to. So we send it to district and charter leaders, LEA leads, or like the heads, educator listservs, the public notice website. So it goes out to the public as well, and our social media and other kind of ways that we disseminate. It's very similar to our core standards process that we put out to the public and then get that information back.
So wait, you're saying you put it out for, this is news to me, sorry. You're putting it out for public comment prior to the completion of it? This is in step 2.
That's part of the board approved process. Yes, it's in step 5, I think, of the board approved process.
But the stakeholders are up in
step 4.
Step 4. So that's prior to going out for public comment though. Is that, sorry, I'm just trying to make sure I understand.
I don't know what you're looking at. If you want to be more specific, step 4 is what mentions stakeholders.
So I could get back on my email. So
Step 4 says public feedback and revision.
Maybe she's talking about step 2, the development team, USBE staff and stakeholders. Is that what you're referring?
Yeah.
It does stay there. And that's the developers, the educators that we hire to develop the core guides.
Can it say that? Can we say stakeholders? I'm just saying when you say stakeholders, I don't know who that, I don't know if you're asking an outside entity to come in and write these for, do you know what I'm saying? If you're asking for educators, let's put that district.
Yeah, it's just educators.
Unless it's someone else we're asking. If we've got to leave it broad, I just want to know who it is. That's all I'm asking.
Nope, it's just educators that we use. So I'll make a note if you all want to vote on that amendment, because this is a board approved document. But
one of them. Okay, and then my next question, sorry, I'm going back and forth here. What is the frequency of the usage of these with LEAs? How frequently are they using them? What's their feedback on this? Who's using them?
Sure. So there's obviously variation across the state, but the core guides are a regular reference material used by educators in the classroom. Many of our LEAs link to our core guides within their own local materials. So I know I worked in Canyons and they had a document for their every grade level that then had key resources for those teachers to leverage. And our core guides are either directly included in those types of resources or linked. For example, as a teacher may be preparing to teach long division, I'm going with a math example, Board Member Earl, because I know I have the math teaching. They can look at the standard in the core guide and look for what are those prerequisite skills, what are the standards that were taught before, or what are the background knowledge needed to access long division, such as you have to understand addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, so basically all the operations, as well as place value to be able to actually complete long division. And so that helps teachers to understand the prerequisite or the supplemental knowledge that's needed beyond we're doing long division today. And so that they can also look at the grade level core standards that are connected to that standard to see how they build, not only within their grade, so for horizontal alignment, but vertical. So it's basically a tool for understanding the progression of the standards, as well as what the rigor of the standards look like. The most sought after section is the assessment exemplars. When people think about what's the rigor of that standard that you're expecting students to be able to deliver, those assessment exemplars that the board added in the 2020 edition really have been the power to show the level of critical thinking and kind of higher level knowledge we would expect that sometimes as teachers would read those standards didn't realize the level of rigor expected for those standards.
Okay, and I know board member Klein has her hand up. I have 2 more questions. One is, how do we avoid driving curriculum? All these districts purchase their own curriculum. They purchase their own content. They purchase their own assessments related to their content. And I get a little, I begin to get concerned when I think I've looked through our core guides. I feel like they are, for the most part, there's some I would disagree with, but for the most part, they stay just that informational piece. But I do get concerned in a couple of areas that we may be driving curriculum, or we may be driving a direction instead of, staying out of what a district should be doing. We argue that the district is, they're capable and competent to do that. And I wonder where the balance is in that. I don't know if that makes sense, where we're being really cautious that we're not driving curriculum, but providing an added benefit to help clarify.
And in preparation for that question, I went back to the documents that we shared in February of 2023 with this committee around the difference between standards and curriculum, because I want to be clear, like what we're talking about, just for everyone's benefit. So standards are the goals for instruction. They're developed at the state level, and they're short statements that describe what students should know and be able to do in each grade level. Curriculum is the content of instruction. So they're the curricula that are selected locally. The curriculum may include the activities, the lessons, the unit plans, the textbooks, the virtual tools, and other resources they're using to actually teach those standards, to teach the standards. Since 2020, the core guides do not include any curricular resources. They only contain content that advances educator understanding of the meaning and the intent of the standards to improve teacher knowledge and instructional decisions related to the standard, but they don't actually include, in the old days, you might remember Earl, we had like, here, go to this website for this lesson. We don't include those. That's not part of the board approved components of the core guide. So at this time, there are no curricular resources in any of the core guides.
Okay, and I do appreciate that. We had extensive discussion over this whole item. I just wanted to make sure we're understanding in a public setting, right, what those are, and that we're not driving curriculum, and being really cautious that we're not doing that, because we do have districts that are, that's the difference, right? We're providing clarity and direction forward. So thank you. Nope, I think that's it.
Board Member Klein.
Yes, thank you. So I appreciated the earlier public comment given by Monica Wilbur and the concerns that she mentioned, as well as those by Board Member Earl. I have a comment that I noticed was posted by another constituent on USBE's Facebook page when this was posted there for board or for public feedback. And I'll just read you quickly. It's short, but this individual echoed much of my concerns and even some of the reasons that I ran for the board due to this situation around core guides a few years ago. She said, I don't understand why we need core guides for all the standards now. I remember watching the explanation during the health core guides debate, and it was said that we had never had core guides for anything except math, because teachers were having difficulty understanding how to teach certain concepts with the new math when Common Core was first implemented. There was huge controversy with the health core guides with inappropriate resources included. But instead of just removing the core guides, we just keep adding more in every subject. Why? We have the standards. There is no need for core guides. I look at these core guides myself, and they look to me to be nothing more than shadow standards, curriculum, and assessments. It allows USBE staff to add their own interpretation of what we as a committee and as a board approve as the standards, allowing for what we've put in place to be reinterpreted to how somebody else wants them to be interpreted at the local level. And I think that that's highly problematic. It circumvents the role of the board, and it is an attempt, in my opinion, to micromanage and usurp local control. And I don't believe we should be ceding our local control and supervision over education to to unelected staff members or outside stakeholders, however that term gets interpreted. And so I would actually ask, I have a motion to put forward that I have sent in. If somebody could put that on the screen, I would appreciate it. But that motion would be, I move that the Standards and Assessment Committee recommend that the USBE discontinue the creation and use of core guides.
Take that one more time. We didn't receive it, but not sure when it was sent.
I sent it to Patty Norman, Andrea Curtin, and Sybil.
Oh, at 10:30.
Read it again. I move that the Standards and Assessment Committee recommend that the USBE discontinue the creation and use of core guides. I don't.
Nice work.
Putting it on the screen. I don't see anything on the screen.
Simplify, simplify, simplify.
Chair.
Yes, please.
So I don't know if it was a motion or not a motion. So if you can look up on the board, which was by board member Earl, in striking out the word stakeholders and adding the word educators. I don't know if that was a motion or if that was, so do we go to which one we do first? So I just wanted to leave that up to you. I'm not sure that order of operations.
Okay, so we did have the one, let's do,
Well,
let's take a look.
Let's do this. That would be part of my motion that I had sent something on. I have a motion, but if board member Klein has hers on the table, let's address that one first. And then if that one passes or whatever, we can do whatever we need.
So the motion as I read it was, I move that the Standards and Assessment Committee recommend that the USBE discontinue the creation and use of core guides. Recommend the USBE discontinue the creation and use of core guides.
You'd remove committee?
No, we don't put standards and assessment. We
don't. Right.
Okay. I didn't say direct staff, but that
recommend that the board discontinue. Or that
recommends that the USBE discontinue the creation and use of core guides. This way we can allow the districts to implement what the board has approved and not have that added layer of bureaucratic interpretation.
Okay, so we've got a motion on the floor. How would that impact the local LEA or the local teachers? How many of them rely on this? How many are wanting additional clarification? Or are we good? It would certainly be a lot less work for USBE to have to add this additional help. Which is, as I understand, created by leader teachers throughout the state who are just offering their experience and direction to assist other teachers in that content area. How to deal with the standards that sometimes may be challenging to interpret or break down. But I'm open. So what's the feeling of? Please go ahead.
Yeah, just a couple of sorry, I'm just looking down. Just a couple of things. If this were the first 6 months of my well, not first 6 months, it was probably the second 6 months of my time on the board, was working with core guides that had referenced all kinds of things. That's why this process was put into place. I went down through a number of the core guides, the math, science, and others that we had this last week that we have in place. For the most part, I think they're a value added, and it sounds like that's why I asked the questions. Are districts using these? Are they accessible, and do they stay within the parameters? I think that they do for the most part. There may be a few items that stray a little bit. I do have a question. Sorry, the reason why I'm wondering, it was on the previous process, it allowed for any concerns with the core guides to be brought to the Standards and Assessment Committee. Was that removed? Am I missing that somewhere? Or is that still?
It's in step 5.
It's down there.
I was
step
going to say,
5,
because it does allow, I think that's the precaution. Sorry, I was looking at the very end instead of where it was that if there is a concern with a core guide, that it can be brought to our committee and addressed. Have you had any complaints on your core guides in the last, or what have those complaints been? And maybe
they want more of them.
So,
we have not received
any
complaints, but we have not received complaints other than why don't you have this done yet? So as step 1 of the process is we don't make these for the sake of staff choosing to make them. They have to be, the LEAs have to make the request, and it has to be a majority that want us to do them. They are also optional to use. They're not a required resource. They are meant to be helpful. If you think I was an elementary teacher, and the number of content areas you're responsible for, to be a master of 7 to 10 different standard sets is asking a lot, especially for a new teacher. And so these have been invaluable for teachers to be able to learn the standards across their grade level, and then also know what happened before them and what happens after. So they've been a great value add. And honestly, the reason we do them is because the LEAs ask for them.
Okay. And so it allows for that process to take place. If there is a concern, that those things can be brought forward. I do know the UEA, or not UEA, sorry, UEN, things on the UEN site, those are not our core guides. Is that accurate?
We have our core guides on our website. UEN sometimes takes our stuff and posts it on theirs, but they are posted on our website.
Okay, so the things that are previously posted there, I'm just wondering if we're posting things there that we normally wouldn't put in a core guide as if they're core guides, or are our core guides set? Does that make sense? Are we sticking within our core guides, or are we sending something different to UEN to be posted as a core guide?
No, because the core guide is a policy, staff are required to stick within the parameters of the step 2 of what's in a core guide. So if you find anything that has more than these elements that have been approved, you're welcome to let me know, and I'll address that with staff.
Okay, and if a board member had a concern with something on a core guide, they could make a request just like the public could, right? And that
absolutely, I think that even would go with step 6, or step 5. If there's concerns related, that might be from board members, it might be from the LEAs, it might be from others. Those could also be brought to this committee.
Okay, thank you. I think I'm ready to vote.
May I comment?
Sure.
Speaking of UEN, I have seen things on there that are very problematic, and they're still there. There was loveisrespect.org is there. It's also on USBE's website, and that is a highly problematic website.
Is that in a? I just want clarification, just real quick. is that on our core guide? Or is that, you're talking about UEN, or are you talking our core guide?
It's on our website, schools.utah.gov, as a resource. And so I would actually ask that resources be added to this, so that if we are promoting something, like, we shouldn't be putting out resources or core guides. We should just be ensuring that districts are following the law and our policies, and letting them be the experts in their field and actually choose their own curriculum and be the experts, do their own homework, find what they need in order for them to comply. And our job is simply to ensure that they are complying, instead of being directing or driving curriculum and assessments. If they're truly the experts that they say they are, then they should be able to do that. And I feel like we are more and more taking that responsibility from them and making it so our teachers, they're doing more and more of what they shouldn't do and less of what they should be doing. And I feel like we have contributed to that by creating these resources and core guides that send them the wrong message, that as if it's our job to do it for them. And so they become more and more dependent on us and ask for more and more help, when that's their responsibility, not ours. And in that happening, we are growing our bureaucracy instead of keeping it.
You, Natalie, or Monica, point out a specific example so that we could see what it is, an example of what you feel is inappropriate and is taking on the job of the teacher, that you feel they're not doing the job that they ought to do because USBE is doing it for them. Do you have an example that's just so we could see
all
that?
Of the core guides in general are a prime example. Some of the content, like loveisrespect.org, other
one more question, is that on a core guide?
I don't know if it's on a core. I don't know if it's in a core guide, but it is on UEN's website under the health.
But we don't have jurisdiction over UEN's website. Remember, Klein, we don't have jurisdiction over UEN's website. This seems irrelevant to the conversation at hand, which is just about if we'd like to remove the core guides or not. And my vote's going to be no, because I think they're really important and super helpful, especially for our new teachers.
But some of those problematic resources that are on UEN are also on USBE's website. Love is Respect is included as a resource under the health core, whether it's in the health core guides or just listed on our website.
And it sounds like here you can bring that up.
Example. Let's look on the website.
Or when we're reviewing them, she can bring them up and bring them to attention, since the committee would be reviewing that. So it just seems like not a great use of our time right now to discuss something that isn't on the table at this moment.
Brought to us for our approval. This is why we have to have the discussion now, because they are not brought to us for our approval. Right. Only the standards.
As Member Earl mentioned, there are plenty of opportunities in the public comment for you to bring up these issues when they do arise, right?
It's also an opportunity right here in our meeting to bring up these issues. So my other question is, if we have no jurisdiction over UEN, and yet all the teachers go to UEN for their resources, I would argue that we have jurisdiction over that, because we are in charge of the public education system. We are given constitutional authority to have general control and supervision over the education system. And if that is being outsourced to UEN, then we should have jurisdiction over what is presented to our teachers on that website. And I see that that's a huge loophole. I've seen all kinds of problematic things on UEN's website, and that is what our teachers are using regularly, probably more than our own website. So I would like to see that brought back for future discussion, because I feel that is out of alignment with what we are charged to do constitutionally.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So we have before us a motion. I can't remember what it is. Where is it?
May I ask a
Okay.
question, please?
Please.
I'm just wondering, just a bit more history about the core guides and those. When was that created, and was it created? And maybe just a brief understanding of why they were created, what need was being filled. What I'm hearing is that is because for new teachers, ? They needed it was kind of supporting them in that profession. So then my next question goes to, do we need core guide developments because our standards aren't clear enough? And whoever
Dr. Franzen, go for it.
Thank you. So these have been around. The last edition of the policy was in 2000, but we've had core guides for a few years before that. Specifically, they've been made to support standards implementation. For example, in ELA, the committee discussed like, where are you going to put the grammar requirements? Those types of pieces need to be somewhere. And so they just add additional clarity to the standards for both new and veteran teachers, as anytime we update the standards, you're relearning what those standards are. And so there's times that, for example, understand that the last number said represents the number of objects counted. The number of objects is the same regardless of their arrangement or in the order in which they were counted. Being able to say what are the prerequisite knowledge and skills to be able to do that standard isn't in the standards. So it's not so much about being able to read and understand the standards. It's about the complexity of teaching and really what are all the cognitive processes that have to go into that. So for example, like learning how to count. You can learn to count one by one at a time. You can start and count on. You can count 10 and add on from there. There's one-to-one correspondence. Like there's all these other pieces that go into a kid accomplishing that standard. And that's what the core guides help you to understand as a teacher. What is the natural instructional progression needed and the prerequisite knowledge and the current knowledge of other standards that are going into that standard to achieve success. So that's basically what the core guides have done over the years, is really help teachers to know the progression of the learning that's required to achieve those standards.
Thank you. And may I ask one more question for follow-up, please?
Please do.
Okay, so Dr. Thronson, do we review each core guide for each standard group and their resources?
So we do review the core guides. There are no resources in core guides any longer due to the 2020 change. So prior to 2020, we had like lesson plans or unit plans or websites people could go to. As you can see now in the core guides, those are no longer part of the process given the board's policy on core guides.
Okay.
Yes.
And then when you develop the core guides, is there a group of people that, how do you collect what areas need to be fortified or addressed in core guides that fall outside of the creation of the standards that we have?
So within the policy, there are certain areas that the core guides hit. So they represent the strand and standard. Then they talk about the concepts and skills to master within that strand and standard. And then what was taught prior to that grade level that is related to achieving success in that standard and where that standard is going in future grade levels. And then the critical background knowledge, anything they might need, which is typically referenced to the current grade level. Academic vocabulary, the language of the standard that the students are going to need to be able to access and use in order to achieve understanding. And then the assessment part here at the bottom. Those are the required elements in a core guide as per board policy and the only elements we include in a core guide. Does that answer your question, Board Member Green?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Absolutely.
Question. These are all things that we should be putting in the standards. If there are specific things that we feel should be addressed by teachers in teaching a certain subject, they should be included in the standards, like language arts standards. We left out all of the things that make English language arts, English language arts, all of the literary techniques, all of the grammar, all of the, these are things that I advocated for putting into the standards. We should need two separate documents. Again, the core guides are an interpretation of what we put in the standards, and we may, as board members, we may or may not agree with that interpretation. And so we shouldn't be, when we're the ones that are accountable to our constituents for what happens in the classroom, we need to be approving those things that affect kids in the classroom, because we're the ones that have to answer to the parents. And so again, I advocate that if there's something in the core guides that is that essential, they should be added into the standards.
In your amendment is to remove core guides, right?
My
Your motion
stands to discontinue the creation and use of core guides, and I would add to that resources. Core guides and resources that essentially are doing the same thing.
Chair Booth, I'm ready to vote if everyone else is.
And
All right.
a follow-up, I actually did find in the health core guides where that is listed as part of it. So it's so I can.
It shouldn't be there. So it will be taken out. Send it to us and where it is, and it'll be taken out.
Well,
That's great.
May I make a comment or address that, please?
Sure.
I think that just brings into like a level of quality check that if the core guides continue, that maybe we address the reality that we can deliver the things that we're saying that we are going to deliver, or the criteria that we say that we're going to meet, we actually are meeting those criterias, as we know, like up to 80 CTE standards a year, and then all of the revisions for core, just the core content, having quality checks across the board. So when things just steps get sidestepped or ignored, then the level of trust in what's been developed kind of goes down as well. So anyway, the systems that we say that we're following, and I would also like that our standards that we're creating by its nature include the things that we feel are valuable in the core guides itself. For me, I see it as a way that we could fortify the standards that we're creating and work on that. So anyway, thank you.
All right, we're ready to vote. We have Member Klein's motion that the committee recommends that the USBE discontinue the creation and use of core guides and resources. Board Member Earl,
No.
Board Member Klein,
Yes.
Board Member Green,
Yes.
Board Member Reel,
No.
Board Member Booth is no. Right?
I have
So
a
that motion fails.
and I
3
have
to
a-
2.
Sorry.
Yes, Board Member Earl.
I move that we approve the core guide review checklist for 2023 with these amendments. That on step 2, we strike stakeholders and replace with educators. On step 5, let me make sure I'm looking at the right. Tell me if this is wrong language. On step 5, we replace should be, it says concerns related to the published core guides should be brought before standards and assessment. We replace should be with are. Concerns related to published core guides are brought before the standards and assessment. So should be is replaced with are. On criteria 5, we strike the criteria 5 and we add to criteria, make sure I got it right. Criteria 2, where it says alignment with current state and federal law and policy, we add in parentheses 53G-10-103 and 53G-10-206. And I can read that. 53G-10-206. And those would be the pieces that are taken out of that they're just not spelled out in criteria 5. So that we're still including those, but we're including those just specifically in where the policy and law are. And there's maybe a grammar correction. You can tell me if I'm wrong on, I don't know that I need to make it as on criteria 3, it says the core guide aligns with grade level standards. I think can be taken out. The core guide aligns with grade level standards. So on criteria 3, just remove is, but that's a grammatical correction, I think. And that's my motion.
Okay.
Board Member Earl, I didn't get your complete motion. I had the recommended motion, but I didn't get your complete motion. So the committee approves the revised draft, meeting these steps, change step 2, step 5, so all of those.
So it'd be step 2 strike. You're going to put educators in, right? You've got that. Step 5 should be an R. That's on there. Strike criteria 5. And on criteria 2, you add the 2 pieces of law. You've done that. And then criteria 3, just removing is. So that would be what I have.
Okay. And then did I get this in red correct?
Approves the revised draft of core standards development process review checklist and forward to the both. Yes.
I would move to divide.
Okay, would you like to speak to this?
I have one question, Member Earl.
Yes.
Yeah, so on criteria 2, we would be just adding the code pieces, basically,
We could
and
even,
removing criteria 5.
that would be right. So we're
Okay.
I think just leaving it broad, state and federal law isn't enough. I think we need to, the pieces we're taking out in criteria 5, we need to make sure that they know that these are 2 pieces that they need to adhere to, because there's a lot of state and federal law, right? So I think in this area, we need to be specific.
You say,
Yeah, I wonder if we put something like as of 20, fall
Well, or we can just
2023,
put,
and then the codes.
it could put including.
Current.
Okay, or including, I like that.
That including, because that suggests that it's not restrictive. So
Right.
I think that's where you're headed, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I just know that I'm just guessing that there'll be updates on both of those coming up. So.
Hey.
Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
I would move to divide the question or the motion so that we are approving the amendments separate from approving it in full.
Okay. Motion to divide, separate the amendments. The entire motion. Approve. Okay. So just give me some instruction of how you would do that. How should we do that?
So if I understand right, it would be doing the amendments first, right? And then the full motion after. And I think that's a good idea.
Okay. So we're now going to vote on the amendment, which is that we change step 2 to state the development team, USB staff and educators work collaboratively to develop implementation supports for each of the standards. Change step 5 and replace should be with R. Criteria 5, strike. Criteria 2, add, including 53G 10-103 and 53G 10-206. Criteria 3, remove the word is. Are we ready to vote? All right. Board Member Earl.
Yes.
Yes. Board Member Klein.
Yes.
Okay. Board Member Green.
Yes.
Real.
Yes.
Board Member Yes. That's unanimous. Okay. Now we're back to, or we're moving on to the motion, the main motion, which was that the committee approves the revised draft of the course standards development process review checklist and forwards to the full board for approval. Anyone like to speak to this by itself? If not,
I am opposed to the core guides in general, so I will not be voting for this. Not because I
okay.
don't appreciate the revisions, but because I'm against the core guides in general.
You. All right. Vote. Board Member Earl,
Yes.
Board Member Klein,
No.
Board Member Green.
No.
Board Member Reel,
Yes.
Board Member Booth, yes. Thank you. That motion passes 3-2. But we have completed the work of our committee meeting today with just going 11 minutes over, which is probably about at the time that we started. So we're right on. Friends, good job. Thank you so much for your hard work and preparation and for your discussion and input. And we'll see you soon. Thank you. This meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sending to my. Pretty.